Chapter 21. The demon cat did not understand, so it grunted as if it was very uncomfortable. Li Yunxin knew that it was because she had attached herself to his body. Taoist priests, swordsmen, and painting Taoist priests all practiced the divine heart technique, which was a profound inner force. Their bodies had their own noble spirit, which was different from the people of the secular world. Therefore, when a demon spirit attached itself to such people, its spirit would be rejected and it would be very uncomfortable. He took a few steps back. Go back. You helped me and I will owe you a favor. But now that my sea of qi is sealed, I can't make a painting that will allow you to attach yourself comfortably. When I find a solution I will come back to you. A gust of chilly wind circled around Li Yunxin, and the demon cat muttered angrily, "Ah? In the future? How long will it take? Ha, there were people in the past. Mumph. No, in the future I don't wait." She suddenly stopped talking, and the grass a few steps away became quiet. The chilly wind had gone far away. The demon cat seemed to have discovered something. Li Yunxin did not know what this inexperienced thing was up to, so he only looked at the path where it came from. But after 2 breaths he suddenly heard a rustling sound. Someone was coming from that direction. He frowned vigilantly and then he was stunned. A girl stumbled out of the forest, waving her hands and feet. As she ran she laughed like a silver bell and muttered, "Ah? Good, ha ha, this is mine, ha ha, hey, this is mine, hee hee hee." The girl had a beautiful face, a slender body, and a skirt fluttering in the wind, bathing in the moonlight. It should have been beautiful. But when Li Yunxin heard the laughter he only felt a little numb. Because it was Qiao Jiesin. The demon cat attached itself to Qiao Jiesin's body. It had been about 10 minutes since the girl died, and Qiao Jiesin's soul should have been taken away, if the black Baiyanjun that he had never seen really existed. In fact, there was still some spiritual qi left in the corpse. Perhaps because of the special physique and timing, the cat demon possessed the body. Not only did she possess the body, but she could also move about freely, as if the body belonged to her in the first place. Qiao Jiesin ran to Li Yunxin, stumbling and bumping into his chest. Li Yunxin frowned slightly and supported him. He wanted to reprimand them, but he didn't know what to say. After all, he had only interacted with Qiao Jiesin for a day. They were not very familiar with each other. After the cat demon rubbed against his chest for a while, Li Yunxin sighed and said, "All right. This can be considered your good fortune. You didn't help me in vain. I've heard of such things. In the past there were also demons who possessed corpses, and there were also righteous masters who did it. After all, corpses were bound to rot. Making the best use of them was already a heavenly Tao. However, there are a few things that you have to pay attention to." His parents had told him these things and he remembered them all. He just didn't expect that they would really come in handy today. There were some rules and regulations for such things. They might not be as strict as the laws and regulations of the future, but there were always some rules. In the past he didn't understand and only thought that it might be pedantry. But now that he saw the cat demon and the 9th young master, he felt that he understood. The 9th young master almost looked like a human. He looked like a human, dressed like a human, and spoke like a human. But he picked up a human and ate them just like how a human picked up a chicken leg and ate it. In the eyes of a great demon like him, human etiquette and education were all bullshit. Human beings were meant to be eaten. There was no possibility of communication, just like how humans in this era did not know how to communicate with pigs and dogs. Moreover, there was no animal protection nowadays. This cat demon did not have divine power like the 9th young master. She possessed a statue and had a temple. She probably did not do as evil as the 9th young master in the past, but from the way she spoke and acted, she did not seem to understand the ways of the world. These beasts were not humans after all. Cultivators often said, "Those who are not of the same race must have a different heart." In fact, there was some truth to it. Therefore there were some rules. You are a demon. Someone would not build a temple for you for no reason. You must have received help from an expert. In that case, that expert should have told you about some rules. I was afraid that you would forget it after a long time, so I will tell you again. Li Yunxin looked at the familiar yet strange Qiao Jiesin and said, "You knew that I could help you, so you helped me. This is a life-saving grace to me, so there's a connection between us. Maybe the person who helped you before had a similar identity as me. Just now, you possessed my body and saw my divine power. So I can help you, but I can also harm you. It all depends on whether you can be a good person. Now, I want to tell you that once you possess a human body and enter the human world, you must abide by human etiquette and education. You are a demon, so you may be wild and hard to tame. But when you encounter something that angers you, you have to think deeply for 3 breaths before deciding what to do. First, you must not kill. Second, you must not marry. Third, at this point, Xiao Jiesin suddenly knelt down in front of him and looked up at him. A pair of big black eyes shone brightly in the moonlight. Her face was pious and serious, and there was even a timid expression. Li Yunxin was stunned for a moment, then realized that this little cat demon was listening. For the animals and spirits, many things that people take for granted are laws for them. People think that filial piety to parents is a matter of course, that not eating one's own kind is a matter of course, and that etiquette is the most common thing. But for the animals and spirits, it is a law, evolved from the great Tao of human relations. It seems that this little cat demon has really been enlightened before, otherwise she would not show such an expression now. Li Yunxin suddenly felt a little better and smiled slightly. Third, you must have a correct view of the world. Xiao Jiesin blinked and tried to speak like a normal person. Ah? 3 views? Is that a big temple? Are you going to build 3 big temples for me? Li Yunxin smiled. 3 views are the outlook on life, the world, and values. You don't need to understand them, just understand them. You will understand them later. But if you want to follow me, we still have to go to the city of Wei. Your body? Let's say that you are scared to the point of losing your mind. After all, we have a place to stay there, so we have to take care of the other people in the escort agency. Well, it doesn't matter if you don't understand, just follow me. When I tell you to get on top of me, you get on top of me. Let's go and save them. What a big tone, young man. As soon as Li Yunxin's voice fell, another voice sounded. This voice probably belonged to a young man about 22 or 23 years old. It was pleasant and magnetic, and the ending tone was high with a hint of unruliness. Then a young man in a brocade white robe came out of the woods. Li Yunxin frowned and his heart skipped a beat. When this person came out, there seemed to be a gentle force around him that pushed away all the grass and trees, and none of them could touch his clothes. His steps were light, and it seemed that even the grass would not bend under his steps. Wherever he went, even the chirping of the insects became gentle. Under the moonlight, there was even a faint layer of brilliance on his body, as if he was a celestial being. Li Yunxin knew that this unfriendly young man in front of him practiced the divine heart technique, a profound inner force skill. Just like his parents. But he should be from Daotong or Kenzo. Considering what happened tonight, he should be the head disciple of the Lingshu sword sect, one of the 72 sects, and a fellow disciple of Kong Kanzi and Qi Songzi. He should be the one who sent the flying sword message to the 6 ghosts of Hejian, asking them to kill all of them. He should have come before, but he didn't. Now he was here. Li Yunxin took a deep breath and smiled. Good evening. Thank you for coming in person. Where are those people? By the way, what's your name? The man walked to a place a dozen steps away from Li Yunxin, glanced at the headless body of the swordsman on the ground, and shook his head slightly. Immortal. Then he looked up at Li Yunxin and smiled absent-mindedly. My Taoist name is Huainanzi. I saw some on my way here and I killed some of them. It's getting boring. Tribulation is always troublesome. You're also a cultivator, right? Well, you practice the divine heart technique. Which spiritual master? Definitely not. You had a conflict with my 2 junior brothers, and your ocean of Qi and mountain of snow was sealed by the Lingshu sword sect. A few days ago I found out that my 2 junior brothers were dead. But I don't think you did it. Should be some big demon. But since you're involved and I can't take revenge on that big demon, I'll just kill you. First, it's a memorial for my 2 junior brothers, and second, it's a tribulation. Don't take it too hard. You're actually going through a tribulation, but it's a death tribulation. Well, have a good journey. Chapter 22. As soon as he finished speaking, Huainanzi drew his sword from his back. It was not appropriate to say that he drew his sword. He made a 2-finger sword gesture with his right hand, turned his wrist and flicked his finger. A thin sword rose from somewhere behind him with a whoosh, hovering above his head, buzzing and spinning like a silver snake. He stared at Li Yunxin for a while and raised his eyebrows. Aren't you afraid? What's the point of being afraid? Tisk, Huainanzi shook his head. I'm almost done with the killing tribulation, and I'm in the middle of the heart tribulation. You know about the heart tribulation, right? I can't just let someone off when he begs for mercy. But I'm not done yet. You can try. What if, my Dao heart isn't strong enough? I'm not an idiot. Li Yunxin shook his head. In the heart tribulation you have to wear out your sympathy. You won't affect your judgment just because you feel sorry for someone. You can't wait for me to beg for mercy and then kill me. How about this? Don't kill me. I'll show you a treasure. I can't be bothered. Huainanzi curled his lips and moved his finger. A thin sword shot out from his head like a bolt of lightning. Fast, Li Yunxin thought. He knew that flying swords were fast, and he also knew that bullets were fast. But he couldn't understand how fast it was unless he saw it with his own eyes. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, the sword light flashed before his eyes. Then there was a continuous sound. When he turned around, he found that Xiao Jiesin had fallen to the ground. A silver sword shot out from behind her with a swoosh. It moved her body and returned to Huai Nanzi's side. Her clothes were torn beyond recognition. Just as Li Yunxin turned her head, she didn't know how many times the silver sword had penetrated her body. Blood seemed to be flowing out of a broken water bag. Li Yunxin soon smelled the strong smell of blood. Xiao Jiesin's belly was already in a mess. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was rotten. He shuddered. The cat demon climbed onto his body. However, his aura was weak and his spiritual body was almost destroyed. Huai Nanzi sheathed his sword and looked at him. That's a demon, right? It's not good to be associated with demons. They were all beasts, cruel, vicious, and inhumane. Look, if you beg for mercy, I'll cut you down with my sword. If you don't beg for mercy, I'll stab you. You choose. Damn it. Li Yunxin sighed. It's not easy to return a favor owed. There was no way out. His opponent's strength was much higher than his, so tricks were useless. It seemed that Huai Nanzi was a reckless person. In such a short time he couldn't figure out what Huai Nanzi liked. He could only invite the ninth young master. He took the paper out of his sleeve with 2 fingers. But just as he moved, he felt a chill on his arm. With a crash, half of his sleeve fell to the ground. His forearm was itchy. He looked down and saw a finger-long gash on his forearm. The gash quickly turned from white to red, and then blood flowed down in streams. The itch turned into a painful itch. What are you doing? Huai Nanzi frowned and asked him, looking very angry, if you move again, I'll cut your hand. Now beg for mercy. I still have things to do. If you weren't a cultivator, I wouldn't have bothered talking to you. Li Yunxin was speechless. He felt that he was indeed in a huge predicament. He had no other way. Or rather, he didn't have a plan that would allow him to escape unscathed. A few ideas appeared in his mind and he came up with a few countermeasures. But suddenly, he closed his eyes and stood in the moonlight and the night wind for a while before opening them again. Fine. I'll beg for mercy and you can kill me with your sword. After a pause, he added, you really have to kill me with your sword. You know I'm a cultivator too and I have my dignity. If you don't keep your word, it'll be an insult to the sect's dignity. Huai Nanzi curled his lips. Stop talking nonsense. Li Yunxin sighed and shrugged her shoulders. She slowly bowed to him with her hands clasped in front. Hurry up. Huai Nanzi urged him sternly, or I'll really kill you. Damn it. Of course Li Yunxin knew this feeling. When a child asked for candy, you told him firmly that it was impossible, and he begged you and walked away. But if you agreed but dawdled or didn't take the candy, he might pester you for dozens of minutes and couldn't leave. The thought of, I'm about to get it, made you irritated, but you couldn't be decisive and calm. He didn't believe that Huai Nanzi would really fly into a rage and kill him with his sword at this moment. What you want but can't get. This was how inner demons were planted. Li Yunxin lifted his hem and kicked the ground with his foot, frowning. There's blood on the ground. Why are you kneeling? Huai Nanzi's face finally showed a more vivid expression, looking angry and amused. You're going to die in a while, so why do you care about blood? Idiot. Anyway, I have to find another place. Li Yunxin took a step away and looked at Huai Nanzi. Huai Nanzi frowned and stared at him fiercely. Li Yunxin strode forward with a peace of mind, as if she was really choosing a grave for herself, picking and choosing a place to be buried. Because Huai Nanzi's expression said, I'm getting impatient. I've decided to let you have a taste of pain later. Now you can do whatever you want. The more annoyed you are, the more pain you'll feel later. Li Yunxin dawdled for 5 minutes. This was the limit of Huai Nanzi's patience he had expected. Then he stood still and raised his head. One last question. Huai Nanzi's face showed an imperceptible expression of relief. Speak. I think the demons are not bad. Why did you kill them? Idiot. It's a waste for you to learn Taoism. What's the point of killing the demons? Huai Nanzi's killing intent was aroused and he put 2 fingers together. Then Li Yunxin and Huai Nanzi both heard the crisp sound of a copper bell coming from afar. A girl said in a crisp voice, Ah, miss, what a fierce tone. That person has. Perhaps because the girl's voice was crisp and clear, it traveled a long distance. Huai Nanzi's expression changed, and the sword in his hand changed. From 2 fingers together, he made a strange hand gesture that looked like an orchid. Then, the silver flying sword split into three, and they circled around him from head to tail, making a low whining sound. "Who's there?" he shouted in a low voice. The two of them watched with bated breath for a few minutes. Finally, a slender little hand reached out from the grass that was as tall as a person. Pushing aside the grass, a little girl with her hair tied into two buns walked out. The little girl held the reins in her hand and pulled out a shiny black donkey from the grass. On the black donkey, a quiet young lady sat with her legs slanted, staring at Li Yunxin with a pair of clear eyes. She bit her lips but didn't look at Huainanzi. But the little girl stood still with the black donkey and helped the young lady up. Then she frowned and asked, "Yes, what's wrong with the demons? Why did you kill them?" Chapter 23. Huainanzi stared at the little maid for a while and frowned. Because no matter how he looked at it, this girl with her hair in two buns was an ordinary person. She was neither a demon nor a cultivator. It could even be said that there were 2 or 3 scratches caused by branches and leaves on her lotus-like arm that was exposed from her sleeve. But ordinary people wouldn't come to this place at this time, and they wouldn't be indifferent to the corpses on the ground. So, the problem was the little girl on the donkey. He couldn't see through her either, but he felt that it was better to stay away from her. The farther the better. Therefore, he restrained his expression and cupped his fists toward the little girl. "I'm Huainanzi, the head disciple of the Lingshu sword sect leader. May I ask, where did you come from? What's the matter?" But the girl on the donkey didn't look at him and didn't seem to hear him. She stretched out her slender hand and patted the little black donkey's butt. Then the black donkey trotted over to Li Yunxin's side. Li Yunxin didn't move. He just lowered his eyes and looked at the little black donkey's hooves. The reason he was stalling for time was because of these two people. Because when he thought he was at his wit's end, the little cat demon in his body told him that something terrible was coming from afar. The little cat demon spoke incoherently, and she was in his body. Therefore, Li Yunxin only knew that in the little cat demon's impression, the person coming was so scary, so scary, so scary. And it wasn't a human. Then Li Yunxin was happy. If it was a human, it couldn't beat Huainanzi. If it wasn't a human, then it could survive. Now the girl walked up to Li Yunxin and stared at him for a while. Then she tilted her leg and got down. With a splashing sound, her small embroidered shoe stepped into a pool of blood. The girl frowned slightly, but still walked to Li Yunxin and circled around her. Then she closed her eyes, put the tip of her delicate nose near Li Yunxin's neck and took a deep breath. From top to bottom, from head to toe, it was as if the most devout old Thai had closed its eyes and deeply inhaled the fragrance of the best delicacy in front of it. It was an indecent and comical thing for a slender and pretty girl to bend over and close her eyes to smell a man in this way. But neither Li Yunxin nor Huainanzi laughed. This was because the girl had started from his neck and sniffed his entire body. She had even walked around him 3 or 4 times, and in between she had only taken a single breath. After a long breath, the girl opened her eyes again and panted a few times, as if she was digesting the breath she had just inhaled. Then she smiled at Li Yunxin and said softly, "You smell so good. I like you. Where are you going?" Li Yunxin looked up at her and smiled gently. "I'm going to the city of Wei. How about you?" The girl smiled and even showed her white teeth. "Then I'll go to the city of Wei too. Come with me." Li Yunxin nodded. "Okay. I have a name, Li Yunxin." The girl blinked happily, her long eyelashes flickering. "Eh? I also have a name, by Yunxin." "That's nice." Li Yunxin said, "But I can't leave yet. Look at her." He pointed to Qiao Jessen on the ground. "She used to be my good friend, but that man killed her." "So," the girl pouted, "yes. The little cat demon is in your body. She doesn't smell good." This girl smelled the cat demon. Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat and he breathed a sigh of relief. He had been worried about how to explain to her that he would have to take a monster with him. Because right now, he was carefully dealing with this gentle and beautiful girl. Even his tone of voice, expression and gaze were deliberately adjusted. From the moment the girl walked to him and breathed in his scent, Li Yunxin realized that she was not a human. Not only was she not a human, but she was very likely to be a big monster at the level of the 9th young master. Although she and the 9th young master were completely different, they had the same behavior pattern. They did things their own way and didn't care about others' opinions. Li Yunxin had met many people in his previous and current lives. Because of his profession, he liked to observe people and remembered some cases. But even if he met the most indifferent guy, he would still care about others' opinions from the bottom of his heart, no matter what. However, the ninth young master and the current Bai Yunshin, their indifference, was like a person walking alone in the forest. Was he lonely? No. There were trees, flowers, birds and animals. But he didn't treat those things as his own kind. Li Yunxin knew that when facing such a scary guy, he couldn't be bored. This kind of monster regarded human lives as ants. If they felt bored, they might tear them apart. He had to be more interesting, like when he was facing the ninth young master. He had to observe her every expression, movement and tone to know what she was thinking and what she might do next. Then he could use this guy to get out of the current predicament. So Li Yunxin glanced at Huai Nanzi, spread out his hands and said casually, "Then help me kill him." Bai Yunshin's eyes lit up. Then she turned to look at Huai Nanzi. The swordsman of the school protected himself with 3 flying swords and stared at Li Yunxin and Bai Yunshin without blinking. Hearing this he shouted, "Fairy, don't make a mistake. That little thief killed 2 of my junior brothers and allied himself with the demons. That's why I..." At this point he suddenly stopped talking. This was because he saw that the little servant girl standing not far away was also staring at him, and her eyes were shining. Greedy people's eyes would also light up when they saw gold and silver, but not like this. Her big eyes, which were originally black and white, suddenly turned emerald green. They emitted a bright light in the night, making her originally cute and beautiful face look like the face of a ghost. Then, the little maidservant opened her mouth, and her mouth stretched all the way to her ears, revealing rows of densely packed, sharp and thin fangs. The master and servant are also monsters. He wasn't a cultivator. Huai Nanzi's heart skipped a beat. He knew that if he didn't use all his strength today, he wouldn't be able to escape unscathed. He also knew that even if he had to use up all his potential today, he had to defeat this monster at the cost of more than 10 years of cultivation and the hope of reaching a higher level in the future. After that, he had to escape alive first. Only then would he have the resources to ask for help, cultivate and take revenge. Therefore his expression turned cold. He spat out a mouthful of qi from his dantian and shouted, "Monster! Do you think I'm afraid of you?" The little maid's neck suddenly expanded and swallowed Huai Nanzi's head along with the 3 flying swords in front of him. Then the neck shrank back in an instant. The little maid pursed her lips and frowned. She looked at her mistress and said, "There's nothing left." Huai Nanzi's headless body twitched on the spot for a while and then fell to the ground with a thud. Chapter 24. The maid bit off the head and the flying sword with her thin teeth as if she were biting a melted chocolate ball. This scene reminded Li Yunxin of a line in a novel he had read in his previous life. "Why do you eat it as soon as you pick it up?" No matter what, Huai Nanzi was a personal disciple of the head of the Ling Su sword sect. This title sounded like a passerby and he was indeed a passerby now. However, Li Yunxin didn't think that Huai Nanzi was a small fry in the real world he lived in. This meant that the master and the maid were indeed terrifyingly powerful demons. Maybe, they were even stronger than the ninth young master. He exhaled softly and tilted his head with a smile. "It doesn't taste good this way. I've seen someone eat it in an interesting way." He tore it apart and then roasted it over a fire. Hearing this, the maid blinked. Aren't you afraid of us?" "Miss, this person isn't afraid of us." Miss Bai Yunshin pursed her lips and smiled. "That's why he's fun." "Then tell me, what did the one you met look like? Did you meet other demons?" "I think he was a demon. I didn't see what he looked like, but he had big eyes. He was as tall as me and had scales on his body. He said he was the ninth young master." In fact, Li Yunxin really wanted to know what kind of demon the ninth young master was. He used to be a modern man and watch TV series. At that time he liked to guess the true appearance of demons. Although he had experienced many dangers, his curiosity hadn't disappeared. Moreover, he wasn't a normal person either in the past or now. Speaking of the mortals and demons in this world, he sometimes felt that he was closer to the demons when he thought about the past. He felt that this Bai Yunshin looked so powerful. Maybe the big demons were familiar with each other and happened to know the ninth young master. However, after he finished speaking, he noticed that the expressions on the maidservant and Bai Yunshin's faces gradually became strange. The two of them looked at each other, and then even Bai Yunshin, who had always looked calm and composed, began to breathe slightly faster. "Where did you see him?" Bai Yunshin squinted her eyes and leaned forward to stare at Li Yunxin. Her posture was very strange. Li Yunxin felt that it was very familiar, but he couldn't remember where or when he had seen it. However, he realized that the demon was no longer smiling. What replaced it was an urgent desire, even more so than when he smelled his own scent. If his experience and knowledge from his previous life were not deceiving him, He felt that it was a kind of hunger for food. Qinghe County? It's him, miss? The young maid's eyes widened and she excitedly jumped up and down. Little nine, little nine, little nine. It's little nine. It's little nine. Bai Yunxin seemed to realize that she had lost her composure. She shrank her neck and became the gentle and delicate girl from a humble family again. However, Li Yunxin noticed that her throat moved as if she was swallowing something. Then, I won't go to the city of Wei with you. Yunxin. Well, it's a good name. You see, I have a name, Bai Yunxin. Bai Yunxin moved closer to him and took 2 light breaths. She said, when I find little nine, I will go to you. You can't hide from me. Oh, I see. She put her hand into her sleeve and felt around. Then, with a slight tug, she pulled out a small silver sword. In fact, it was not appropriate to call it a sword. This slender weapon was 2 fingers wide. It looked more like a straight knife with a sharp tip. However, one side was fully bladed and the other side was half-bladed. It was a weapon that could stab and slash. The body of the sword was 1 meter long. There was almost no blade, only a white, smooth and long sword hilt. Here, this is for you. Bai Yunxin said, take it and I will find you. Li Yunxin stretched out his hands and immediately took it. Okay. I will wait for you in the city of Wei. But you can't not come. Bai Yunxin pursed her lips and smiled. If you run away, I will eat you. Then she suddenly opened her arms. Her sleeves suddenly became wide and almost covered her whole body. A gust of wind suddenly gathered in the forest, accompanied by a clear and sharp whistle. Then the 2 wide sleeves of Bai Yunxin turned into a thick cloud of fog and rushed up to the sky with the gust. After a few seconds, only Li Yunxin and the sword in his hand were left in the forest. He stood there for another 10 seconds, making sure that the master, the servant and the black donkey were all gone. Then he let out a long breath and slightly bent down to rub his legs. His legs were numb and about to cramp. His clothes were soaked in sweat. When the cold wind blew, he felt irritated and cold as if he was going to fall sick. Damn it. In just 10 days he met 2 big demons. He looked at the sword in his hand and slightly frowned. He didn't know why Bai Yunxin thought that he was tasty, but he knew that the sword was not a good thing. Maybe the demon would find him with this thing in the future. He didn't believe the love and kindness that the demon showed to him. Because he knew that he actually understood the mentality of those demons. They had the appearance of a human, but in their hearts, they would never treat humans as their own kind. So he bent down and forcefully stabbed the sword into the grass. The sword was surprisingly sharp and strong. It went into the ground effortlessly. During this time, Li Yunxin felt a slight obstruction, probably because he hit a stone. But the tip of the sword seemed to cut the stone in the ground easily. Then he patted the back of his head and said, "Hey, come out." Demons usually attached themselves to the Naiwan palace on the head. The cat demon had curled up on his body for a long time without making a sound. She must have been scared out of her wits by the big demon, Bai Yunxin. After a few breaths, he heard Mrs. Sanhua say, "Huh? She left? Scared me to death. One peck, oh scared to death. Sigh, my good body, sigh, can only be used like this, sigh." Her voice gradually faded. The next moment, Li Yunxin found that Xiao Jiasen's body on the ground stood up again. But this time it was too horrible to look at. It was not an exaggeration to say that her intestines were pierced through. Li Yunxin frowned. "Let her rest in peace. She is already like this, you can't walk on the road like this, it will scare people." But the cat demon seemed to be unusually obsessed with this body. She shook her head discontentedly and reached out to cover her stomach. "Ah. Clothes, put on clothes, ah? That's good, put on clothes. Humph, how dare you, this is my Dharma body, what is that? What is that? She let go of her hand that was covering her stomach, and her attention was completely attracted by something else. Then she used a pair of bloody hands to grab Li Yunxin. A cat was cute like this, but a female corpse was not cute at all. Li Yunxin frowned and shouted at her, "What are you doing?" The cat demon was startled and retracted her hand to cover her stomach, but her eyes were fixed on Li Yunxin's chest. What is this? Oh, this is fun, At this time, Li Yunxin noticed that his chest was lit up. There was moonlight in the forest, but it was still night, not the full moon. Therefore, he could still clearly see that there was a soft white light coming from under the clothes on his chest. It was a square light the size of a palm. Li Yunxin was shocked and hurriedly put his hand into his chest and took out the thing. It was a crystal clear jade slip, but now it had turned into a soft milky white. It seemed that there was light in it, but it didn't dissipate. On one side of the jade slip, there was a row of handwriting. And under the row of handwriting, a slender black dot was constantly jumping. Li Yunxin stared at the row of handwriting and was stunned. Then he raised his hand and rubbed his eyes hard, then looked at the row of handwriting again. He maintained an extremely strange expression on his face, and after standing in a daze for a few minutes, he finally opened his slightly trembling lips. Holy shit. Chapter 25. Now, Li Yunxin knew why this jade slip was called the Jade Slip of Enlightenment. Because at this moment it was really bright. After he came to this world, many things gave him a great shock. For example, turning paper into salt, demons, flying swords, and people's belief that they could become immortals through cultivation. But all those things added up couldn't compare to this moment, the moment he saw that line of words. Excited and chaotic emotions filled his chest in an instant. Even with his 2 lives' worth of experience, he couldn't help but stare at the jade for a long time with his eyes wide open. This thing is open. In fact, after the shock he thought of another problem. After getting this jade slip from the place where his parents hid it, he thought of countless ways to open it, hoping that this treasure could give him some magical power to get out of the previous predicament. But this thing was like a piece of lifeless glass. No matter what he did, it didn't respond. Even when he injected the little bit of spiritual power he cultivated with the water cloud force into it, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. But at this moment in the middle of the night, this thing opened. Li Yunxin held it, spent 2 minutes being surprised, and another 3 minutes thinking of all the reasons he could think of. In the end he concluded that the most likely reason was the 2 demons. He had tried many ways before. Water immersion, fire, sun exposure, and spiritual power transfer. If there was anything different about the past few days, in other words, he encountered a great fiendish demon. First it was the 9th young master, then by Yunxin and her little maid. Maybe the demon power of the big demons affected this thing. But why would the Jade Slip of Enlightenment left by the Art Saint 2000 years ago be opened with demon power? And who was the Art Saint? A strange and familiar feeling flowed in Li Yunxin's chest. At the same time, there was a familiar warmth that he thought he would never experience again. It turned out that in this world he was not alone. At least he was not alone. He took a deep breath and ignored the noisy little cat demon beside him. With slightly trembling fingers, he tapped the next line of the characters 9 times. But the jade slip didn't respond. He pondered for a moment, then clicked again 18 times. This time, a soft, heavenly melody rang out. The 2 lines of text on the surface of the treasure disappeared, and the entire surface of the jade slip flowed with light. Then Li Yunxin saw the dense text on the jade slip. Li Yunxin did not first care about the content of the text, but looked at the text itself. Look at the wording, the tone, the grammar. Then he closed his eyes and let out a long breath. He looked at the upper right corner of the jade slip and tapped its surface 3 or 4 times. Thus, this painting treasure once again became a transparent piece of glass. He felt that he roughly knew how to open this thing. Even though he'd only seen a small portion of the words inside, he'd already realized why this thing was called a supreme treasure of the Tao of painting. Cultivators had to go through tribulations. They needed to experience the myriad of things in the world and all sorts of emotions. But a person could be poor and frustrated all his life, or he could be satisfied all the time. Those who were poor and successful could be considered to have lived a wonderful life. If they had experienced the joys and sorrows of life, they could be considered to have lived a legendary life. Life was short and cultivators had to seize every second. They did not have time to carefully experience life, so they had to rely on external forces. From this point of view, the paintings of painters were quite similar to those of pills and medicines. However, painters were humans after all, and their experiences were limited. Moreover, painters in ancient times were still Taoist painters. They were also disciples of one of the 3 major sects in the world, the Celestial Sect of Wonders. Their lives were even more generous, so how could they have many experiences of poverty? However, the demons and negative karma of life were often because of greed and anger. This greed and anger mostly stemmed from poverty and frustration. Thus, there were very few famous works of this kind. The most famous painting that had been passed down was the Dream of the Red Chamber created by Perfected Xueqin in ancient times. Perfected Xueqin was born in a cultivation family in the Grotto Heaven, and her parents were both experts. When she was young, she was extremely respected and enjoyed the glory of the world. However, when she was young, the art path was declining, and she experienced the sadness of the world and the fickleness of human nature. Thus, after living in seclusion, she spent 10 years to create the Dream of the Red Chamber. This true state expert used his entire life skill to pour all the sadness and joy he had experienced into the painting, leaving behind such a treasure that had been passed down from generation to generation. He died of exhaustion. Although the 7-foot scroll at the end of the painting was destroyed because of the war, it was still a painting treasure that was worshipped by the Grotto Heaven sect. Its status was only second to the 8 treasures ancient scroll left behind by the art saint. It was said that if a cultivator comprehended this painting with his heart, he could experience endless sadness and anxiety, and temper his Tao heart. If a mortal saw this painting, it would be fine. If there was a Tao bone in their body, but they had not cultivated, once they understood the true meaning of the painting, they would die of heartache. But now, in this clear jade scroll, there was something even more precious than that. Li Yunxin realized that once he found a demon power that could supply this jade scroll, and slowly learned and digested the things in it, he might become a person like the legendary art saint from 2,000 years ago. The 7 emotions and 6 desires could be examined, and the sadness and joy of the world could be controlled and released at will. Roses and tigers could be painted in the details, and mountains could be painted in the strokes. But first he had to solve the problem in front of him. Bai Yunxin, that demon, wanted to pester him. Of course, he couldn't just take the sword she gave him to the city of Wei. The sword must be a token, and the demon could use it to find him. So he had to go somewhere else. And he had to bring the little cat demon. It was a demon after all, and it still had demon power. It also had to figure out his parents' seclusion, and that he was being hunted. The Taoist priests of the 3 sects were all dead, but they were all in the hands of the demon. Let those who covet the Illumination Jade Scroll investigate and find trouble with the fiendish demons. He had to find a place to study the thing in his hand and dig out the secret of the art saint, and then he could make plans. So he took a deep breath to calm himself down and put the jade scroll back into his arms. Let's go. If you like this body so much, then come with me. When I find a better place for you to take possession of, you can let this girl rest in peace. The cat demon was very willing. Even if it was temporarily for her to use this body. Seeing that Li Yunxin was about to leave, she hurriedly wrapped her ragged clothes around her belly and staggered to catch up. Li Yunxin and the cat demon carefully walked through the forest. After a quarter of an hour, they finally saw the meadow outside the forest, the direction where they were taken into the forest. He stopped behind a tree and looked out warily. But the cat demon suddenly made a sound of surprise. Then she bent down with excitement and joy and stretched out her hands. She peeked at Li Yunxin and pursed her lips as if she wanted to do something, but was afraid of being scolded. Finally, her instinct won over the little worry in her mind. She squinted her eyes and quickly patted the thing sticking out from Li Yun's waist and giggled, "Hey? Well, I'm back. Well, haha, fun, ha." Li Yunxin frowned. "What are you doing?" But he was stunned when he took a look at his waist. The sword that Bai Yunxin gave him and he stabbed it deep into the ground was hanging on his waist again. Chapter 26. Li Yunxin's expression changed. He stared at it for a while and sighed softly. It was much easier for him to accept this kind of thing than anyone else in this world. There were many similar plots in movies and novels, immortals teasing mortals and giving them something. No matter how he threw it away, it would always appear in his arms or on his body. Now he finally saw this kind of supernatural power. He put his fingers on the hilt of the sword at his waist and stroked it for a while. He sighed again. "Let's go. We still have to go to the city of Wei." Since he couldn't throw it away with his current power, he could only bring it with him. But if he ran away with it, if Bai Yunxin found him, she would probably be angry. Maybe she would tear him apart the moment she saw him. That kind of demon was temperamental and couldn't be judged by ordinary people's standards. So he took out the sword from his belt and held it in his hand. He whispered, "Let's go." The sky was still dark, but the moon was not covered by the clouds. There was a breeze on the meadow, and the wild grass swayed slightly, like a dark green ocean. Li Yunxin drew 2 pieces of paper and held them in his hand. He walked cautiously with the cat demon. Maybe Bai Yunxin killed the 6 ghosts in the river when she came, or maybe they didn't. After 3 steps, Li Yunxin stepped on a hard body. He looked down and saw a headless corpse. They were all killed. The dead man wore a green Taoist robe and his head was bitten off. It seemed to be done by the little maid. There were 2 corpses beside the swordsman's body. They were from the escort agency. Maybe they were all dead. But they still had to go to the city of Wei and they needed a place to stay. Li Yunxin looked at Qiao Jiasin beside him and frowned slightly. Actually, this little girl could still be used. At this moment, there was a sound in the grass beside him. Li Yunxin slashed with his sword. The extremely sharp blade effortlessly cut through the weeds, piercing into the depths of the underbrush like a waterfall, stopping just short of a person's neck. It was only then that he was able to see clearly under the moonlight. It was actually Lu Laodao. It seemed that Laodao did not know whether the person was a friend or a foe. He was about to sneak away in the bushes when Li Yunxin heard him. Right now, a shining blade was resting on his neck. The skin had already been cut by the blade. He was so frightened that he couldn't make a sound for a long time. His legs were trembling like a sieve. Lu Laodao rolled his eyes and saw clearly that the person under the moonlight was the young Li Yunxin. His throat moved a few times and he pounced on him and hugged his leg. "Master! Save me! There's a demon!" Li Yunxin quickly covered his mouth. "Don't shout. Let me ask you, are those swordsmen all dead?" "Dead, all dead." Lu Laodao rubbed his eyes. "After all these years, I have finally opened my eyes today. Hey, who wants to open their eyes? I mean, it's a good thing to meet a master. At first I thought I saw a ghost or a demon. It's really a demon, a master biting a head off. If it wasn't for me. Okay, it's okay. I've seen the demon before. It's gone now." Li Yunxin put away his sword, pried Lu Laodao's hand off his leg, and pulled away the cat demon who was trying to play with Lu Laodao's hair. "Let me ask you again, how many people are still alive in the escort agency?" Hearing Li Yunxin's words, Laodao blinked and stared at him. "Master, did you fight with the demon? Did you drive them away?" Then he stared at Li Yunxin for a while and suddenly bowed his head. "I've been muddle-headed for so many years and now I finally see the real God. Please accept me as your disciple so that I can see the Tao of painting in my lifetime." Li Yunxin sighed, "Are you crazy? Can't you reply to me first before bringing up other things?" "Her father is still here, only her father is left." Lu Laodao quickly lifted his head from the ground and wiped his face. Then he carefully looked at Qiao Jessen. Is this child infatuated?" The cat demon blinked. How dare you? How dare you?" Li Yunxin sighed and pulled the cat demon behind him. She saw the demon and was scared silly. "Qiao Duanhong is still alive? That's a good thing. Where is he?" Old Taoist Lu scratched his messy hair and moved 2 steps to the side. He reached out and pushed aside a clump of weeds. "Here." Li Yunxin saw Qiao Duanhong, who was on the verge of death. As the leader of an escort agency who was close to becoming a second-rate master, he seemed to have fought hard before. His body was full of sword wounds, especially his legs. His desperate struggle had probably angered the swordsman, so the swordsman deliberately tortured him to death. But he didn't expect that once the bad guy played like this, the situation could be reversed. The little servant girl rushed over and bit off his head. But Qiao Duanhong's legs seemed to have been crippled. The bones of his knees were exposed and blood was gushing out. It was unknown if he could be saved. Lu Laodao probably thought that he couldn't be saved. Li Yunxin walked over and hit a few major acupuncture points on his body, and the blood flow gradually stopped. Both cultivators and martial arts practitioners had to learn to stop bleeding by hitting acupuncture points, but it wasn't that magical. This was an emergency method to temporarily stop the blood flow. If it took too long, it might be crippled. But Li Yunxin didn't think Qiao Duanhong's condition could get any worse. His legs couldn't be saved under the current medical conditions. The only thing that could save his life was the smoke of the Qiao family's ancestral grave. Lu Laodao didn't seem reliable and Qiao Jessen was even more unreliable. Li Yunxin thought for a moment, then tore a piece of cloth from Lu Laodao's body and hastily bandaged Qiao Duanhong's wounds. Then, the situation became more complicated. Li Yunxin now realized how convenient it was to cut the scene. For example, in the previous scene, there was a group of injured people who were on the verge of death but smiling in satisfaction. In the next scene, there was a group of injured people covered in bandages lying on a comfortable and dry bed. But now, Lu Laodao looked like he could be blown over by a gust of wind, and Qiao Jessen was still a young girl. He couldn't walk far with this strong man on his back. The situation was annoying. "Let's wait for the car," Li Yunxin said. "Looking at the time, it'll be dawn in about 2 to 4 hours. More than 2 hours. He'll be lucky to meet someone who can take us away. If he doesn't, then he'll have lived his life in the wind and rain." After saying that, he tried to carry Qiao Duanhong on his back. Lu Laodao's legs were weak as he supported Qiao Duanhong. After walking for more than 10 minutes, they finally reached the previous intersection. Then they put Qiao Duanhong on a patch of grass. Then they began to wait. Lu Laodao leaned against him, trembling. After thinking for a long time, he asked, I say, Master, what are you? Li Yunxin raised a finger. Listen to me. Don't ask about my background and don't mention what happened tonight to anyone. I don't want anyone to know my identity. I'm out for a trial. If you want to learn something, I can teach you. But if someone asks about what happened today, you have to be a hero. This girl was shocked, and if her family asks about what happened today, you know what to say. Anyway, I don't want to be disturbed and I plan to stay at your place for a while. Be good and I'll teach you the night walk in brocade, okay? Chapter 27. From the beginning to the end, Lu Laodao only cared about the coming out of the tribulation. He was both surprised and happy. He felt that he might have met a master from the Tongtian sect or the sect. Otherwise, how could he scare away the demon? Looking at his indifferent attitude towards human life and death, he was even more sure of his guess. Only people like Daotong and Kenzo would do something like that. Taishang senseless. Abandoning the 7 emotions and 6 desires, reaching the realm of Taishang senseless, then passing the tribulation and becoming a supreme celestial being. Lao Dao glanced at Qiao Jiesin, and felt that there was something wrong with this girl. After all, it was still dark and his old eyes could not see clearly. Otherwise he could probably see that blood was dripping from Qiao Jiesin's stomach. In fact, there was not much blood, the intestines were broken and the stomach was rotten. After being tormented for so long, the blood in the body should have been drained. If there were no accidents, in the next few days, this body would slowly decompose and rot like a normal corpse until it could no longer maintain a complete form and collapsed. This was also the problem that Li Yunxin wanted to solve. Lu Laodao thought for a while and agreed. Then he tried to lower his head and try to sound out Li Yunxin. But Li Yunxin was thinking about his own matters and did not pay much attention to him. When the sky was about to turn white, Lu Laodao began to yawn. Li Yunxin then saw 2 people coming from the other side of the road. One in white, the other in black. They seemed to be carrying a copper bell chain in their hands. As they walked, they rattled. When they got closer, Li Yunxin could see them clearly. The person in white was carrying a brass bell which was as big as a fist. The person in black was holding an iron chain which hung down to his feet. Both of them wore a black and white tall hat, and their faces were pale. But their eyes were thin and long, and they looked a little charming. It was hard to tell whether they were male or female. He saw some words on the hat and squinted slightly. The words written on the white hat were, "Where did the ogres come from?" The words written on the black hat were, "Where to go after reincarnation?" When Li Yunxin saw these 2 sentences, his heart skipped a beat. It was as if thunder had exploded beside his ears. These 2 sentences seemed to be imprinted in his heart, speaking out his thoughts. He looked to his left and right and realized that Lu Laodao, Qiao Duanhong and Qiao Jiesin were all gone. He was the only one sitting by the roadside. He stood up and frowned. "Who are the 2 of you?" Black and white stopped beside him and looked at him. The man in white said, "Oh? This person is so strange. Is he in the book of life and death?" The man in black took out a thin booklet from his sleeve and flipped through it, saying, "I don't have one." This person had actually slipped through. "You asked him about his birth date and who he was in his previous life. I filled in the blanks." The man in white turned around and shook the bell, asking, "Who were you in your previous life? What about the 8 characters? You've told me everything." Li Yunxin frowned and shook his head. "Who are you? How do you know about me?" The man in white grinned. "You idiot. In this world, other than those who have escaped reincarnation, is there anyone that I, Black Bai Yanjun, don't know? Since you won't tell me, don't blame me, Bai Yanjun, for making you suffer." After saying that, he raised his hand and pierced it directly into Li Yunxin's chest. He was shocked and hurriedly retreated a few steps. He covered his chest and found that there was no wound at all. He only saw that the man in white's hand was empty, only holding a ball of light. He slightly widened his eyes and said in surprise, "Oh? In your previous life you didn't have a heart?" He stared at the ball of light again and his expression changed slightly. "Oh? And it's a man-eating ogre." With every sentence he said, the ball of light became fainter. When there was only a bean-sized glimmer left on his fingertip, Bai Yanjun's hand shook and he violently shook off the glimmer. He screamed, "Aya? This person." The Black Yama King glanced at him unhappily. "Why are you so panicked?" Bai Yanjun shouted, "Do you remember that demon from 2,000 years ago? He came to Dark Azura Hall to kill? This person is actually the same as him. He is not in the 6 paths of reincarnation." The Black Yama King was shocked and the metal chain in his hand shook. He pulled Bai Yanjun back a step and carefully looked at Li Yunxin, saying, Then, did that woman go to take it?" The White Hell Lord tugged at his sleeve and walked away. Take what? Don't let him be angry. Let's go, let's go. From now on, don't even take the soul of anyone who has anything to do with him. Or else he will cause trouble again. Li Yunxin listened to their conversation and was frustrated. He stretched out his hand to stop them. Who are you people? With this shout he woke up. In front of him was a young man with a round face. He was staring at him with interest and holding his hand. Li Yunxin stared at him for a while and hurriedly pulled his hand back. He frowned. What are you doing? The sky was bright and the sun was high in the sky. On the road there was a man, a horse and a carriage. The round-faced man who was holding his hand finally straightened and comforted him gently. Don't panic, don't panic. Everything is fine now. I am Yu Meng. Little brother, don't be afraid. Yu Meng had a pair of big watery eyes. He smiled and took a step back. He said, Little brother, you probably had a nightmare just now. In your dream you asked who you were and stretched out your hand. I took the opportunity to hold it. Don't misunderstand. At this time, Li Yunxin realized that he was half lying on the grass. Lu Laodao and Xiao Jiesin were already in the big carriage. Lu Laodao was probably too sleepy to bear it. He was sleeping with his back facing him. Xiao Jiesin was facing him, but she only stared at him without saying a word. This was strange. Li Yunxin had told the cat demon not to talk much and not to let others touch her body. He had told her to think that he was Xiao Jiesin. He had never thought that she would be so obedient. And he actually fell asleep. This was even more unbelievable. Who are you? Li Yunxin stood up and looked at Yu Meng. Other than his eyes, there was nothing special about this person. He was dressed in coarse clothes that were commonly seen on the road, with a smock on the outside. He wore a bamboo hat on his head. Sunlight shone through the gaps of the hat and sprinkled on his forehead. It was rare for him to be fair. However, his temperament was quite gentle. If he appeared on the streets of the city, he would be wearing a silk robe and fanning himself with a folding fan. It would be most suitable. But it was strange for him to appear here. Because his temperament was more like that of a rich young master or a scholar. He was not a vagabond. Li Yunxin was confident in his ability to read people. But this person in front of him, he felt that he couldn't see through him. This person's temperament was too strange. Yu Meng cupped his hands and said softly, Oh, I am Yu Meng. Li Yunxin frowned. I know you are Yu Meng. I mean, who are you? He felt that it was rare for him to fall asleep in the dangerous wilderness. Someone had probably done something to him. The person in front of him was very suspicious. Yu Meng was stunned and blinked. Then he slowly raised his hand and pointed at himself. Me? I am Yu Meng. You don't know me? He was crazy and had severe Chinibu syndrome. Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes. Why should I know you? Yu Meng blinked again. Oh, you really don't know me? Li Yunxin carefully looked at his expression. But he didn't see any flaws. This person's surprise was just right. In terms of the skill of faking it, he had really reached the point of perfection. A strange smile appeared on Yu Meng's face. This smile almost made Li Yunxin stab his sword into his chest. But before he did anything, Li Yunxin suddenly realized something. Maybe it wasn't because the other person was too complicated and well disguised that he couldn't see through him. But because this person was extremely simple. He was different from ordinary people. As expected. Yu Meng rubbed his hands. I am Yu Meng, the current head of the Escort Association of the Daqing State. Chapter 28. Li Yunxin thought for a while and said, Oh. Seeing his reaction, Yu Meng felt even happier. Because, this person. Actually, no. She immediately clung to him, wanting to become sworn brothers with him and flatter him. And he already said that he was the head of the escort agency of the Daqing State. Father's words were indeed correct. Yu Meng thought to himself that he would meet more interesting people in Jianghu. Unlike those young masters and ladies in the city of Wei, they really annoyed him to death. Thinking of this, he looked at Li Yunxin again, his heart overflowing with joy. Since the other party treated him like a Jianghu warrior, he felt that he should show some of the strength of a Jianghu person. He had to be more mature. So he rubbed his face, cleared his throat and said seriously, I am the head of the escort agency of the Daqing State. I was ordered by my father to travel Jianghu and make friends with heroes. When I passed by here on my way back to Wei, I smelled the incense. Nausea? Oh? No, back to Wei, back to the city of Wei. Please continue. Speaking of which, I smelled the incense. This incense was the first idea I had when I took office. In the past, the escort agencies of the Daqing state had their own ways, and the relationship between them was weak. I thought that the escort agencies of the world were one family, and naturally had the obligation to help each other. So I ordered people to make this incense. I carried it with me when I was on a mission, and secretly sprinkled it out when I was in danger. Only those who smelled the other incense would be able to smell this special smell, and then follow it. I smelled it when I passed by here. I saw 3 of you were unconscious, so I went to check them out. It was a horrible sight. Li Yunxin frowned slightly. He didn't have time to clean up the corpses on the ground. He was waiting for a few days when no one would see the corpses rotting, and then the birds and beasts in the forest eating them. Then no one would be able to guess what happened that day. But this Yu Meng actually followed the smell and went deep into the forest? He must have seen all kinds of strange things. While he was wondering if he should do something, he saw Yu Meng take 2 steps back and forth, then clapped his hands and let out a long sigh. I've thought about this a long time ago, but because of my limited financial resources I can't do it. Although the Daqing state is rich and populous, there are still many places like this in the wilderness. Along the way there might be ferocious beasts like tigers, leopards, jackals, and wolves. With companions they will become bolder, and when they become bolder they will attack and harass pedestrians. He looked at Li Yunxin with a pained expression. I've carefully examined the corpses. 4 or 5 of them had their heads bitten off and blood was everywhere. There were also some who seemed to have died from internal strife. It must have been because they were too panicked and started fighting amongst themselves. Were 4 of you. 1 old, 1 young, 1 disabled, and 1 woman. They actually abandoned you by the roadside. This was simply an idiot. Li Yunxin was dumbfounded as he listened to him. He repeatedly confirmed that this person was not forcefully clearing the ground for him. Then he asked, "Then, what do you think about the burnt carts and goods by the roadside? In order to save their own lives, what can't they do?" Yu Meng sighed again with a pained expression. When those ferocious beasts first attacked, they must have connected the carts head to tail to form a circle to defend against their attack. Then they were in a deadlock, so they lit a fire and wanted to use the fire to scare them away. Later the stalemate was too long, so they could only endure the pain and throw in the goods to burn for a longer time. After that, the group of beasts finally rushed in. The people were running for their lives and the fire went out of control, which also ignited the carts. May I ask, sir, what inspired you to make such a reasonable deduction? Where did it come from? That's not difficult. I've read a book called The Legend of Fierce Beasts. In the book, the hero Nank traveled through Jianghu, solving cases and arresting criminals. He had such an experience. Li Yunxin took a deep breath, cupped his hands and said seriously, "Brother you have a sharp eye and extraordinary knowledge. I admire you. That's the truth. To be honest, this escort agency is Qiao's Hongfu escort agency. That old man and I are passers-by. A few days ago we were attacked by ferocious beasts. Now only the owner of the escort agency, Qiao Duanhong, is alive, and his terrified daughter, Qiao Jiesin, is still alive. If you can help them return to the city of Wei. This is our escort agency's business. Leave it to me." Yu Meng waved his hand full of pride. At the same time he was very satisfied with Li Yunxin as a friend. He really didn't know what the dragon head of the escort agency meant. He also didn't know what kind of existence the Yu family in the city of Wei was. This person is interesting. Therefore, before he arrived at the city of Wei, Li Yunxin tested him again and again. Finally he realized that he had met a legendary person. The kind that said, "Oh my God, this girl actually scolded me and was rude to me. She is so different and so attractive." That's right, there was something wrong with Yu Meng's brain. Although it wasn't especially bad, it was different from ordinary people. Li Yunxin vaguely deduced that the Yu family mentioned by Yu Meng was a super rich family. The Yu family had nothing to do with the escort agency. But one day the old man of the Yu family lost his mind. He distributed money to every escort agency in the Daqing state. Finally, they gathered together and created an escort agency association. His son became the dragon head of the association and came up with new ways to play. But no one took it seriously. Anyway, the only thing that the escort agency association did was to distribute money every new year. Who wouldn't be willing to accept money from the Yu family? Everyone said that the old man of the Yu family had a silly son in his old age, so he wanted to save face for him. After all, he had a lot of money, so he didn't feel bad about it. Lu Laodao, who had recovered, bit his ear and told him about it. It wasn't Yu Meng's fault that the 3 of them fainted for no reason. Li Yunxin only thought about the previous dream. He vaguely felt that it had something to do with what happened in the dream, but he didn't have the time to think about it carefully. Because the little cat demon was not right. The little cat demon was awake, but she was frighteningly obedient. She didn't say anything. She just leaned against Li Yunxin and stared at Yu Meng as if he was a monster. Li Yunxin was afraid that her body would rot and smell, so he secretly looked at the wound. In the end he found that the wound was strangely white. It was soft and elastic but like rubber. It didn't rot and it didn't heal. That should be a good thing, but he also felt that it had something to do with the dream. In the dream, the two self-proclaimed Black by Yanjun actually talked about his past life. If it was just a dream it wouldn't be strange. But now that he thought about what the two said before they left in a hurry, take what? Don't let him be angry. Let's go. From now on, don't take the souls of anyone who has anything to do with him, or else he will cause trouble again. If that was the case, then looking at the rotten body of Qiao Jiesen, Li Yunxin realized that he might have really encountered something like Yama King's dream. He was after all a cultivator and he knew that in this world, the underworld, Sanluo Temple and Black by Yanjun did exist. Chapter 29. But regarding the existence of Black by Yanjun, there was no actual proof, more of it was psychological proof. This had to start from the cultivation system of this world. It was said that this world originally only had a thin layer of shell. There was no life, no mountains and rivers. But then the Celestials appeared, and with their supreme magical powers, they pieced together the thin shell floating in the void, forming a huge ball, taking the meaning of perfection, called it the heavenly sphere. Then there were plants, living things, mountains and rivers in this world. The Celestials created mortals and taught them magical powers. But the mortals obtained power and tried to challenge the Celestials. So the Celestials destroyed the world and created the people of today. They also saw that the people of today lived in hardship, and that there were powerful demons in the world, so they passed on the cultivation method to the lower realm. This was what the cultivators called the Heavenly Heart Technique. The Heavenly Heart Technique, one technique with 3 magical powers, established the 3 inheritances of Daotong, Kenzo, and the painting school. It was said that when mortals cultivated the various techniques derived from the Heavenly Heart Technique, when they reached an extremely high level, they could ascend to immortality and become a celestial. But now, very few people knew about the painting school, and the remaining Daotong and Kenzo had never heard of anyone actually ascending to immortality. The current Daotong Sage of Calligraphy and Kenzo Sage of Sword were the 2 people with the highest level of cultivation, having lived for almost 3,000 years. Such people, in the eyes of mortals, were not only immortals, but also the kind of immortals that almost couldn't be believed to exist and only thought of as a legend. But even so, the 2 strongest people in the world had yet to ascend to immortality. Some people said that the 2 sages already had the power to break through the void, but they were waiting for something but no one really knew. This meant that for more than 3,000 years, the cultivators knew that celestials and true immortals did exist, and could even occasionally hear celestial music, but no one had ever seen them. As for the Sanluo Temple in the underworld, it was said that during the creation of the world, 2 celestials voluntarily sacrificed themselves, personally entering the heavenly sphere where the people were, and turning into Black by Yanjun, who specialized in collecting souls and performing reincarnation. Therefore, Black by Yanjun was actually a true immortal. Compared to those celestial beings who lived above the 9 heavens, Black by Yanjun was more approachable. These 2 always had to deal with people, so sometimes they would appear in his dreams. Cultivators had cultivated the supernatural powers of the out-of-body state and visualization in dreams. Occasionally they would see the 2 Yama Kings in their dreams. But that was not a good thing. It was probably the 2 Yama Kings who came to inform those enlightened perfected ones that their lifespan was up. In 3 days they would come to arrest them. Slowly the incident of defaming by Yanjun was passed down, and it became a widely known and deeply believed figure. Li Yunxin knew that there were similar legends in his original world, and there were 2 similar ones. However, they were called the Black and White Impermanents. As he thought about it, he realized that his dream, it was probably because of some reason that he met the 2 Yama Kings. For example, they were here to capture Qiao Jiesen's soul. So, Qiao Jiesen's soul hasn't been captured yet? Is it still wandering somewhere in the world of the living? Or will the souls of those who are related to him wander in the world of the living after they die? Li Yunxin did not know if the little cat demon's current appearance was also related to that matter. As for what they mentioned 2,000 years ago, there was a person who attacked the Sanluo Temple. Who were they referring to? Was there such supernatural power? What did it have to do with him? There seemed to be an inference in his heart, but he could not think about it deeply. Because they arrived at the city of Wei. From the place where he met Yu Meng to the city of Wei, they walked for a total of 8 hours. Yu Meng did not talk to him much. He just drove the carriage and glanced at Li Yunxin from time to time. It seemed that he wanted to be close to him, but he was afraid that he would become like those people in the past. How could Li Yunxin not understand his intention? He could easily deal with this kind of teenager's temperament and IQ. So along the way, only old Taoist Lu kept talking to him about the city of Wei. The old man also knew that he was in big trouble this time, and he was more afraid than Li Yunxin that this matter would be exposed. He repeatedly reminded him that there were some people in the city that should not be messed with. Or in other words, he felt that Li Yunxin could afford to mess with them, but he could not afford to. For example, there were 2 schools in this city. Daotong Shangqing Danding School and Kenzo Lingshu Sword School. 36 paradises and 72 schools were indeed a group of immortals. But not all immortals could eat clouds and rosy clouds. Eating, drinking, and saluting all required money. Although there was more than one Daqing state in the world and every court more or less gave them land and offerings, it was always good to have more income. Moreover, the world was not peaceful. Occasionally, demons appeared in the world and they needed to be subdued by experts. Therefore, the paradises and schools had stations in the big cities in the mortal world. Those who felt that they could not go further on the path of cultivation, or those who happened to have to go through tribulations would come to these stations. Occasionally they would subdue demons, accept offerings or pick some disciples, or they would do some unknown things. Even the government had to be courteous to the school stations in the city. When the experts of the schools happened to see and decide a case, even if the magistrate had objections, he had to report to the state government for a decision. Then there were the few big families in the city. The city of Wei was not the capital, and it was not even the state government. But before that, it was the former capital of the previous dynasty. After the previous dynasty's demise, the small court operated in the city of Wei for more than 60 years, but eventually could not hold on. After the Daqing state's army attacked the city of Wei, they massacred the city for 3 days before stopping. After that, the nobles of the previous dynasty felt that the city of Wei was inauspicious, so they set the capital in the capital. But the city of Wei was after all a place where rivers converged and businesses transited. 100 years after the establishment of the Daqing state, it flourished again. Some retired officials would settle down in the city of Wei, and some rich merchants would also settle down there. Over time, the city of Wei became a place of tigers and dragons. Even the officials of the capital did not dare to be presumptuous here. But Li Yunxin did not have the patience to remember which family Lao Dao was talking about. He did not want to cause trouble in the city of Wei. He only wanted to find a way to remove the inhibition on his ocean of Qi and mountain of snow, and then focus on studying the jade slip of enlightenment. It was not only because of curiosity, but also because of his background. He realized that the art sage was definitely extraordinary. When entering the city, Li Yunxin noticed the soldiers in the city of Wei. The 4 guards were wearing bright armor and looked strong. Compared to the soldiers in Qinghe County, they were much better looking. He also noticed the attitude of the guards when they saw Yu Meng. He was lazy and indifferent to passers-by. Occasionally, when he saw a new face that seemed to have something to do with him, he would interrogate them and take advantage of them. But when they saw Yu Meng in the crowd, they immediately puffed out their chests, picked up the swords and spears leaning against the city wall, and shouted to clear a path through the pedestrians entering the city. When they approached Yu Meng, they saw the seriously injured and unconscious Xiao Duanhong in the carriage, and Xiao Jessen covered in blood. Their eyes widened and they shouted in an exaggerated tone, "Dragon head! Which idiot hurt your people? I will ask my brothers to arrest him." As they spoke, they walked beside the carriage as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Li Yunxin frowned. Even if they were trying to please him, this was too much of an act. But soon he knew what these 4 ruffian soldiers were after. Yu Meng also frowned and waved his hand. "Go away. Go away. You don't need to care. It's a tiger or a leopard. Go away." But the soldiers pretended not to hear him, and continued to protect him while shouting to clear a path for him. Yu Meng was annoyed as if he did not like being treated like this. He took out some silver from his pocket and threw it on the ground. "This is your reward. Go away, go away. Don't block my way." Li Yunxin's eyes were sharp, and he saw 3 ingots of 5 taels of silver. 15 taels of silver. According to the purchasing power of this world, it was about 30,000 yuan in his previous life. Casually throwing 30,000 yuan on the street, the 4 soldiers must have come for this. It seemed like it was not the first time they did this. The Yu family was a wealthy family in the city of Wei, and Yu Meng was the only young master of the Yu family. How could he be bullied like this? But he probably did not think that he was being bullied. After all, he was like that. Chapter 30. Li Yunxin didn't need to worry about what was going to happen next. Although Yu Meng's brain was slightly damaged, he was still a normal person. Plus, there was Lu Laodao, a local tyrant who was eager to get close to Yu Meng, a super-rich second generation, so he could do things with ease. There were still some people in the Qiao's Hongfu escort agency, mostly women and children. Seeing that only Qiao Duanhong and his silly daughter came back, the whole family cried and became a mess. Fortunately, the Dragon King temple that Lu Laodao presided over was in the back street of the Hongfu escort agency, so he followed and took care of a lot of things. Lu Laodao seemed to be hoping that Yu Meng would reward him with some money, just like how he dismissed the guards at the city gate. Who knew that this young master only frowned at the noisy Hongfu escort agency's entrance for a while, then left 10 silver ingots and turned to leave. Looking at Lu Laodao's expression, Li Yunxin guessed that the 100 taels of silver was just enough for the Hongfu escort agency to compensate for the loss of goods. Maybe Lu Laodao could freeload a little, but definitely not a lot. Li Yunxin was standing under a crooked moonflower tree in front of the Dragon King temple, listening to the noise in the Qiao family's courtyard across the street. This moonflower tree was as thick as a person's arms, and looked like it had 100 years of history. It was slanted, right in front of the door of the Dragon King temple, like a natural flower garland. It was mid-spring. The delicate and luxuriant 9-petal moonflowers bloomed between the slightly curled emerald leaves, occasionally sprinkling fragrant petals with the wind, falling on half of Li Yunxin's shoulder. Yu Meng stood in front of him, cupped his hands and said, "Brother Li, farewell. I know that you don't like to be disturbed, you're idle, and you don't like the rich and powerful. So I won't talk to you about gold and silver. If you need my help in the future, don't hesitate to ask. You know where I live." After saying that, he looked at Li Yunxin reluctantly. "Then, I'm leaving." This was crazy. Li Yunxin thought, even if you use your brain to think, you would know that I need money. On the way here, I've already said that my parents died when I was young, and I've been traveling the world by myself. Recently, I'm going to be Lu Laodao's disciple. Of course I need money. Thus he smiled faintly. "Brother, you have a safe journey. Feel free to drop by when you have time." Yu Meng walked away, looking back 3 times at every step. From a distance, Li Yunxin saw that as soon as he reached the mouth of the alley, he was immediately surrounded by a group of young people dressed in silk clothes. They talked noisily for a while and then they disappeared around the corner of the street. Actually, this person wasn't too bad. He was simple-minded but very kind. Perhaps it would be useful in the future. He turned around, pushed open the 2 wooden doors of the Dragon King temple, and walked into the courtyard. After all, it was a temple. Even if it was a small temple, it was still slightly bigger than an ordinary house. There was a cobblestone road in the front yard. On the left were 4 thin, jagged rocks and weeds. On the right were 2 clumps of thin bamboos. In between there was a small path, a stone table and 2 stone stools. It seemed that at least in this aspect, Lu Laodao's taste was outstanding. After thinking about it, he felt relieved. After all, he was a painter, an artist. The main house was the temple where the Wei River Dragon King was worshipped. Li Yunxin could see the statue of the Dragon King in the inside of the house. It was almost the same as what he imagined. However, whether the Wei River Dragon King really existed, and how useful it was, Li Yunxin still had doubts. Of course, he knew that the rain was a natural phenomenon. But considering that there were demons and supernatural powers in this world, maybe part of the rain was caused by the demons and masters. As for the Wei River Dragon King, it wasn't necessarily a dragon. Maybe it was some aquatic demon that, for the sake of some incense, revealed its supernatural power like the little cat demon. Over time, people built a temple for it. Was this kind of demon considered a true god? Yes, it was. After all, it enjoyed the power of faith from the believers. But was it not the Dragon King? Of course not. The demons in this world could enjoy the power of faith from the believers, and could even use it to cultivate. The stronger the power of faith, the more power the demons got. Unfortunately, because of some rules, human cultivators couldn't enjoy this kind of thing. Although it was the power of faith, it wasn't necessarily the positive emotions like respect, admiration, and worship. Fear and disgust were also the same. That's why a big demon like the 9th young master could eat people and harm people as much as he wanted. Others would be afraid of such a thing, and the power of faith he got was also strong. But if he kept making trouble, It was inevitable that he would be targeted by the cultivators in the mortal world. After all, it was better to do something good. Li Yunxin walked in, reached out his hand to touch the clay statue and closed his eyes slightly. His cultivation state was Xuanzhen void state. When he was close to the transcendent state, he could feel the spiritual body of the demon. Although Li Yunxin's ocean of qi and mountain of snow was sealed, he was still in the transcendent state and he could feel something. So he felt some kind of slightly familiar aura. But he really couldn't tell where he had encountered it before. He had seen 3 big demons and a little cat demon, but none of them matched. Maybe it was an illusion. But no matter what, it meant that the statue in the temple was indeed spiritual, or in the words of the common people, it was blessed. The demon called Dragon King left its Reiki here, so it could really hear the pleas of the masses, as long as it was willing. Li Yunxin walked through the temple and walked to the back where Lu Laodao lived. There was a main room and 2 wing rooms in the backyard, all of which looked old. But the eaves were covered with green moss, and there was a piece of fluffy grass under the steps. There was a small pond in the courtyard built with pebbles, and the bottom of the pond was also pebbles. 5 lotus petals were floating on the clear water, and the stem was pulled out but not yet bloomed. There was a small path beside the pond, and there were wooden porches outside the 3 rooms. Thinking about it, it was also romantic to warm a glass of wine and watch the rain and snow on a rainy and snowy day. This Lu Laodao, but on the inside. Li Yunxin stayed in the courtyard for a while and Lu Laodao hurried back. Master, something happened. Li Yunxin frowned. Don't be silly. In this city call me Brother Xian. Lu Laodao didn't have time to change the way he addressed him. Something happened to that little girl. Xiao Jiasen? Wasn't she quite obedient when she went back? Now she's making a fuss. Lu Laodao rubbed his hands. I say Brother Xian, tell me the truth, I won't tell anyone. Was that girl scared or was she possessed? She kept calling me Mrs. Sanhua in the Qiao house. Li Yunxin sighed. Let's go, bring me to her. Lu Laodao hurriedly led Li Yunxin to the Qiao house. The Qiao house had a big courtyard. After all, it was an escort agency, so it was well off. The layout was exquisite, and the atmosphere was well off. But Li Yunxin was not in the mood to look at it. As soon as he was led by a male servant into the backyard where the womenfolk lived, he heard a strange voice. I'm Mrs. Sanhua, I am here. Where are the 3 animals? What grass? What grass? Where's the meat? Chapter 31. Li Yunxin sighed, took a few more steps forward and saw Qiao Jiasen. This room should be the former bedroom of the real Qiao Jiasen. But now the door was open and he could see everything in the room. He had seen the people in the room when he sent Qiao Duanhong and Qiao Jiasen back. One was a middle-aged woman wearing a dark green bikini and a lake-colored dress. She should be Qiao Duanhong's legal wife, Qiao Wangshi. The other one was wearing a foot-long pearl hairpin, which should be Qiao Duanhong's concubine, Qiao Lushi. The 2 women were supporting each other and leaning against the door, looking at Qiao Jiasen with a worried and fearful expression. The other young man was Li Yunxin's first time seeing. He was dressed in brown, with thin eyebrows and eyes, a small mustache on the side of his mouth and thin dry lips. According to Lu Laodao, he was Qiao Duanhong's nephew. He knew that something had happened and came to help. His name was Qiao Jiaming. It was said that he was a loafer in the city, and he usually did nothing. He had some medical skills but he was never good at it. When he had nothing to do, he would come to his uncle's house to ask for money, and he was not well received. But this time almost all the men in the Qiao family died. He became the pillar of the family. When Qiao Jiaming saw Li Yunxin and Lu Laodao, he pointed at them and shouted, Coming. Li Yunxin didn't look at him but looked at Qiao Jiasen. She was sitting cross-legged on the table in the middle of the room, and she hadn't changed out of her bloody clothes. Her left hand was on her leg and her right hand was in the air, making a nondescript gesture. She closed her eyes and shook her head, full of demonic aura. Li Yunxin shouted in a low voice, Qiao Jiasen. When the demon cat heard this familiar voice, her whole body quivered, and she hurriedly opened her eyes. When he saw that it was Li Yunxin, he quickly got off the table. She seemed to want to hide under the table or in a corner, but she remembered that Li Yunxin had told her before, be a good person when you get to the Qiao family or I won't care about you in the future. She was flustered. It was really like a cat that jumped onto the table and knocked over a glass of water, only to be discovered by its owner. Li Yunxin did not know why this cat demon was so well behaved on the way, but at this moment, it relapsed. But she guessed that perhaps this spirit had found out that she had gone to the Qiao family and Li Yunxin had disappeared, so her simple-minded mind felt that no one cared about her anymore. She also saw that the Qiao family treated her with great care and treated her with good food and drinks, so she went wild. When he saw Li Yunxin, he naturally looked like a child who had done something wrong. Li Yunxin's low shout had such an effect. The three of them were very surprised. When they saw him take a step forward, that Qiao Jessen obediently lowered her head and moved closer to his side, they were even more surprised. Who didn't know that the eldest daughter of the Qiao family had a sharp tongue and a lively personality? Only in front of her father, Qiao Duanhong, would she be so obedient. The three of them each had their own thoughts. The two women did not dare to speak. After all, his family and Lu Laodao were familiar with each other. They lived in the front and back, and every new year, they would ask Lu Laodao to paint a few festive paintings, knowing that he was an expert. When Lu Laodao said that this youth named Li Yunxin was his new disciple, the two women's thoughts were a beat apart. But Qiao Jiaming did not have any friendship with Lu Laodao. In addition, when he saw Li Yunxin's appearance, sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes, red lips and white teeth, he was a handsome youth. Qiao Jiaming's heart became unhappy. He had been eyeing this cousin of his for a long time. He had long thought that one day he would marry this younger sister of his. There were no sons in the Qiao family's first branch. If he could get a beauty and money, wouldn't that be wonderful? But now, this crazy girl who was suspected to be possessed by a demon was so close to Li Yunxin. Qiao Jiaming, who was originally a reckless person, suddenly became angry. He immediately rolled up his sleeves and grabbed Li Yunxin's arm from behind. Brat! When Li Yunxin turned his head, Qiao Jiaming threw a punch at his face. But the punch missed. With Li Yunxin's skills and his sea of qi sealed, although he was not a match for the direct disciple of the Ling Su sword sect leader, dealing with ordinary people was like playing with children. In his eyes, Qiao Jiaming's fierce punch moved in slow motion. He slightly tilted his head with a cold face, and the other party's fist brushed past the tip of his nose. He tilted his body again and pushed slightly. Qiao Jiaming staggered and fell on the table where the little cat demon had been sitting. His forehead hit the corner of the table. At that time he cried because of the pain. Qiao Jiaming stamped his feet in pain. While covering his forehead, he pointed at Li Yunxin and cursed, "You little bastard! You hooked up with my sister, did some shady things, and now you want to hit me? You can't leave the Qiao family's door today." Li Yunxin calmly tilted his head and looked at him, ignoring him. He turned to the two madams and spread his hands. "What's wrong? Are you here to punish me?" The two madams were stunned, and then they heard Qiao Jiaming shout again, "First aunt, second aunt, don't let this brat go. Look at my sister. She's fine now, but she's covered in blood. You're not smart either. Think about it, what could have happened, huh? Just now, when you wanted to help her change her clothes, didn't you hold on tightly and not let her take them off? Then you went crazy?" Two aunts, let me tell you, this is called amnesia. She's been stimulated. My sister doesn't dare to take off her clothes now. What do you think she's been stimulated, huh? This little bastard stayed with my sister in the wild for a night, who knows what they did. Now that the whole city of Wei knows about this, how can my sister get married in the future? As her cousin, I don't despise her. Well, I don't despise her. Qiao Jiaming repeated and continued to shout, but others don't like her. Look at her now, who has she done this to? She's pulling his clothes. Something bad has happened. Aunt, it's a family scandal. Li Yunxin then spread his hands to Lu Laodao. Master, what do you think? Lu Laodao's forehead was sweating. He didn't expect Qiao Jiaming to do this. He only knew that Li Yunxin killed a lot of people last night, and he had a powerful background, maybe even more powerful than all the people in the Qiao family put together. With a bitter face, he cupped his hands to the two madams. Madams, we've been neighbors for so many years. You know how I am, Han Yuanzi. I Laodao don't steal, rob, or cheat. And I won't do anything under the table. He cupped his hands high. My master is the successor of the Dongshen sect. I Han Yuanzi. Qiao Jiaming sat on the ground and shouted, What Dongshen sect, huh? If the masters of the Dongshen sect hear this, they will break your legs, old liar. Even if Lu Laodao had a good temper, he couldn't stand it anymore. Because this old man might be greedy and spineless, but he valued the master very much. No matter where, how could a disloyal and unfilial person get along? Today this poor man insulted the master. There were several servants watching, and he, Han Yuanzi, was a famous painter in the city of Wei. Once the news got out, how could he raise his head in the future? So his old face turned cold and he swung his sleeves. Madams, I'm not Laodao. I won't give you face. Since coming back to the city of Wei, Lao Dao has been busy with everything because I wanted to be friends with Qiao Jiaming. Now I encounter this kind of thing, humph. He glared at Qiao Jiaming and didn't say anything. The two women still couldn't say anything, and Qiao Jiaming's voice became the background sound again. Li Yunxin smiled, touched Qiao Jessen's head and said in a low voice, "Then stay here, I live in the back. Remember what I said before, be a good person. If you mention something like Mrs. Sanhua again, I won't help you in the future. But apart from this, well, you can do whatever you want." Then he looked up at the two women. Jessen was scared. "When we escaped, we were chased into a broken temple, which is Mrs. Sanhua Temple. In fact, we didn't encounter any beast but a strong man and a monster. If your master didn't die, you would know when he woke up. It was my master who scared the monster away and saved two people." "Do you think I'm a 3-year-old? What monster?" "I tell you, you can't run," Qiao Jiaming shouted again. Li Yunxin ignored him. "We don't care about your family affairs. Take care of yourself. Master, let's go." After saying that, he walked to old Lu's side. Lao Dao slightly turned his body, snorted again and swung his sleeves to leave. Seeing that they were really going to leave, Qiao Jiaming stared at them. "Why are you standing there? Stop him." But the servant was a servant of the Qiao family, not his, so he only looked at the two madams. The two madams wanted to say something but stopped. They looked at each other and didn't say anything. Qiao Jiaming didn't dare to stop them. He knew that Li Yunxin had kung fu. Although he was 4 or 5 years older than Li Yunxin, he wouldn't have become an idle scoundrel if he was really a hot-blooded person. Outside the door, Lu Laodao apologized. Li Yunxin smiled. "Prepare a place for me first." He really didn't take this matter to heart. He didn't know how many people with all kinds of moral integrity and lack of intelligence in the past. Qiao Jiaming wasn't worthy of his real anger. In fact, Qiao Jessen staying there was just a temporary measure. Her wounds couldn't heal, and it would be terrible if they were seen. Li Yunxin originally planned to use the excuse of killing monsters to get her to come to his side. But this matter had to be considered in the long run. Let the little cat monster play with it. As long as she didn't go too far and didn't alarm the people of Daotong and Kenzhou, she would have to beg him in the end. After all, the Qiao family knew that she listened to him now. Chapter 32. As soon as Li Yunxin and Lu Laodao left, the other side began to argue. Hearing Li Yunxin's words, Qiao Jessen no longer spoke sarcastically. Instead, she walked to the table and sat down. She looked around and finally stared at the feather duster in the vase. Madame Qiao, the main wife, looked at Qiao Jessen and glared at Qiao Jiaming. "Have you cried enough? Get up. What do you think?" Qiao Jiaming curled his lips and stood up. He looked at Qiao Jessen and wanted to say something. But his second wife, Madame Qiao, hurriedly waved at him. Come out quickly." After all, she thought that Qiao Jessen might be possessed and was a little scared. So she patted the dust on her body and walked out. After the door was closed, the three of them told the servants to keep an eye on her and walked to the main room. In the past, Qiao Jiaming would shrink his shoulders when he came here, but now he swaggered. Walking beside the flower garden, he saw a peony in full bloom. He stretched out his hand, broke it, inserted it in his temple and hummed a tune. Madame Qiao frowned. "What a good flower. Alas, forget it." Qiao Jiaming smiled proudly. "Aunt is so sensible. My uncle's injury is so serious that he will die soon. If he dies, I will be the only man in the Qiao family. At that time, my two aunts may live with me. These flowers and plants are nothing. They are all mine. And Jessen?" Madame Qiao glared at him. "Don't have any ideas about her." Qiao Jiaming blinked his eyes strangely. "Huh? What do you mean? She is not my two aunts' biological daughter. She usually doesn't show a good face when she sees you. My younger sister will follow the escort and show her face in public. I don't know if she is pure or not. It is her blessing that I want her." "You idiot." Madame Qiao reached out to twist his ear. Madame Qiao just looked at them, frowned and said nothing. "Didn't you see who sent them back? The young master of the Yu family. The head of the escort agency. Let me ask you, a guard of the Yu clan thinks that our eyes are growing on top of our heads. What kind of karma did that dead ghost Qiao Duanhong cultivate in his past life, for the Yu clan's young master to personally send it back, and even leave behind 10 ingots of silver? Did you fall for Jessen?" Qiao Jiaming blinked. "Dragonhead? Young master of the Yu family? Yu Meng? Second aunt, what you said is right." He rubbed his hands again and smiled evilly. "But I have to say, even though Yu Meng is a fool that everyone in the city of Wei knows, he definitely doesn't lack women. I guess I just wanted to have some fun. My little sister Jessin is also quite pretty. Then, it wouldn't be too late for the young master to get tired of playing with her. I can also take her in as a concubine. Madame Chiao frowned again, but after thinking for a while she sighed, alas. How could he say something like that at this moment? Your uncle's life and death are still unknown. But that young master you seems to treat Lu Laodao. Xiao Jiaming snorted. Who doesn't that fool treat well? He can reward a beggar with 1 tael of silver every time he sees a fool. Lu Laodao humphed. How did we deal with him before? This time we have to find money to compensate and appease him. Don't empty our money. Lu Laodao, an old man, occupied such a good place as the Dragon King Temple for nothing. In my opinion, second aunt, you should bribe the prefectural magistrate and sentence him as an accomplice to the bandits. Then we can take over the Dragon King Temple. With the current land price in the city of Wei, his property is worth 300 taels of silver. But Lu Laodao is a little famous after all. Madame Chiao hesitated. Other families will also ask for his paintings, such as the Zhang family of Shaoshi Bridge. Xiao Jiaming laughed. Auntie, you are women and don't go out after all. Every time Lu Laodao comes to boast, you take it seriously? He is a little famous. Who doesn't know that he shamelessly goes to those rich families and begs them to buy his paintings? Seeing that he is pitiful or annoyed, he buys 1 or 2 paintings and then comes to boast to you that he begs for his paintings. The Zhang family of Shaoshi Bridge. Lu Laodao was short of money that time and the weather was good, so no one went to the Dragon King Temple, so he went to the gatekeeper of the Zhang family to drink tea for a whole day. The gatekeeper was impatient with him and gave him 2 taels of silver to send him away. Madame Chiao and Madame Chiao looked at each other in surprise. Is that so? Xiao Jiaming curled his lips. That old man humph. And that guy also colluded with the bandits. When we find someone to cure Jessin, we will report it to the magistrate. But Lu Laodao said. When Xiao Duanhong wakes up, he will know what is going on. Xiao Jiaming turned his head and said nothing. He smiled. But he must wake up first. After saying this, the 3 of them were silent for a while. Chapter 33. Just like that, nothing happened for 2 days. Life was so peaceful that Li Yunxin sighed. It had been a long time since he had been so relaxed. During these 2 days, Lu Laodao really treated Li Yunxin as his master. He served him good tea and water, flattered him, and didn't even go out of the door. So Li Yunxin taught him the water cloud force. According to his parents, the water cloud force was one of the entry-level parts of a whole set of skills. It was also part of the divine heart technique. They didn't have time to teach him the more advanced skills. But this skill could be considered broad and profound. It not only refined the body but also the spiritual power. For painters it was a very useful skill. For the painters in the secular world, it was a supreme magic skill. So Lu Laodao went to the wing room to study the formula that Li Yunxin taught him. Li Yunxin reopened the jade slip of enlightenment. At the moment he could only see some general things in the jade slip that belonged to the common goods. But even if they were common goods, they were the common goods of the previous art saint, the enemy of the world. He found the way to open the seal of Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi. This matter had taken him quite a bit of effort. A person like the art saint was like a university professor. The professor's scientific notes would never include something like, according to the Pythagorean theorem, we can deduce. He preferred the tone of easily proven. Therefore, Li Yunxin had to ponder over many things that the art saint had casually overlooked. He guessed that Lu Laodao, who was in the next wing room, was also in the same situation. For example, the art saint's attitude toward the ceiling of Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi was, just open it. Li Yunxin spent 1.5 days scratching until his thumb was sore. Then he barely knew that the power of the seal of Qi Si could be counteracted by another power. For example, the demonic power. He used to think that big demons like the 9th young master and Bai Yunxin could easily open the seal. But if they weren't crazy, who would allow such an existence to come into contact with their Qi Si? One had to know that once one's Snow Mountain and Qi Si were destroyed, one could forget about cultivating for the rest of their lives. The little cat demon had demonic power, but that day, even when her entire spirit body was attached to his body, she still couldn't do anything. It could be seen that her weak demonic power was useless. But there was another kind of power, the power of wishes. Demons could absorb the power of wishes and convert it into their own cultivation, so perhaps the power of wishes was feasible. Li Yunxin turned his attention to the Dragon King Temple in front of him. Therefore at noon, when the 2 of them sat by the stone table in the bamboo forest, After answering a few of Lu Laodao's questions, Li Yunxin said, I want to change the Dragon King statue in front. Lu Laodao, yes. The paint has been peeled off, and the design isn't beautiful either. You and I are both artists. How can you tolerate it? Lu Laodao had gotten used to the way Li Yunxin spoke these 2 days. He knew that Li Yunxin was not satisfied with the Dragon King statue. But he still smiled and said, well, Brother Xen, the statue is indeed not beautiful. But the position of a true god. That's why I haven't touched it. Unlike some temples where the statues are dazzling in gold and jade, but they are only made of clay. It is said that more than 100 years ago, there was a year when the Wei River Dragon King traveled through the clouds and summoned rain. He was tired and came to this temple to rest. Somehow he fell in love with this statue and left some spiritual energy on it. Since then people often came to pray for rain. I'm not good at it, so I don't know if it's true. But it is said that a master from a sect came and said that this statue does have spiritual energy. Are there other temples in this city? Li Yunxin asked him. Your temple doesn't have a lot of incense and few people come here. There must be other big temples elsewhere, right? There is a temple at the Sanhiku outside the city. It also worships the Wei River Dragon King. Humph, that temple was built a few decades ago. It is magnificent and beautiful. Lu Laodao was not convinced. That's why I stole the incense. When Master was still alive. There is a position of a true god in that temple? There is, then it's fine. There is still one that can be used. That's settled. In the afternoon, get someone to dismantle the statue and I will get something else to hang on it. Your location is not good, and your products are not updated. Where do you get the money for incense? That is also the Dragon King Temple. This is the Dragon King Temple. Of course, I won't come here to worship. If it was someone else, Lu Laodao would definitely ignore them. But this Li Yunxin taught him the water cloud force, and now he said that he wanted to dismantle the position of a true god. Lu Laodao only felt that it was the style of an expert from the Heavenly Cave sect. It was obvious that he had seen this many times and didn't take it to heart. He gritted his teeth, stamped his feet and sighed. Fine. I will listen to Brother Xian. I will just say that there is some income from this temple. If I really dismantle it, Li Yunxin laughed. Who said that it is not a temple if it is dismantled? I will put something else on it. Luckily Yu Meng left 100 taels of silver and Lu Laodao took 2 taels. So he used the money to find someone to dismantle the statue in the afternoon. Then Li Yunxin asked him to go over and add the finishing touches. Lu Laodao entered the room that used to belong to him. On the table was a framed 8 feet long painting. It was made using the treasured cloud paper of the secular world. It was not afraid of smoke and fire. There were 2 people drawn on the paper. The man in the middle was wearing a golden helmet and armor, holding a ferocious-looking spear. Lu Laodao felt that he looked a little like Li Yunxin, but it might be an illusion. Beside the man in the golden helmet was a woman in red armor, but her face was a little dull. The painting was very good. It was vivid as if it would jump out of the paper in the next moment. But Lu Laodao didn't know who the 2 people in the painting were. Li Yunxin passed the brush to him and said with a smile, "This man's surname is Jia and his name is Wen. He's the crown prince of a divine nation built by a celestial. This woman is called Shiwana. She was saved by the prince in the past. After that, she devoted herself to Tao and cultivated the real body of the dragon lady. This Prince Jiawen can ensure the safety of the house. When setting up a flag in the escort agency, building a house or digging a pit, you can come and pay your respects to him. Look at his golden helmet and armor, he's also full of wealth, so there's nothing wrong in seeking wealth. Needless to say, this dragon lady could call the wind and summon the rain. You just need to add a stroke here and the painting spirit will be formed." It was the first time Lu Laodao had heard of these 2 gods. He did not even dare to breathe too loudly. He only took the brush, held his breath, and channeled what little spiritual power he had left. He pointed the brush on the spear of the Crown Prince Jiawen, which had attained great success in the Supreme Sage Mystery Numinous Treasure. He instantly felt the painting tremble slightly, and an extremely mysterious flow of spiritual power extended to an unknown place in the distance. Lu Laodao was shocked. Firstly, he thought that Li Yunxin was only using this painting to make up the numbers, but in fact he had other motives. Who would have thought that after touching the painting he would discover that the spiritual energy in the painting really did flow? It was connected to a certain existence. Moreover, it was so tight and sturdy. If the 2 gods really lived in the 9th heaven, what kind of divine power would they have? Li Yunxin actually managed to invite him. Secondly, He could actually feel everything that had shocked him just now. Chapter 34. But in fact the painting did have Reiki. But it was not the Prince of Deva, nor the Dragon Lady. It was Li Yunxin himself. He painted the painting with his own Reiki, so Lu Laodao felt that the prince looked like Li Yunxin, even though they had two different faces. If there were cultivators from the cave heaven or other sects who knew the details, they would say that Li Yunxin was seeking his own death. The cultivators in this world could not absorb the power of faith. This was a lesson learned from the experience of countless predecessors dying. But Li Yunxin did not have time to learn everything from his parents, and the Saint of Painting's jade slip said that it was easy to obtain, so he attached his Reiki to it. In fact, worshipping the painting was the same as worshipping him. Because he was very familiar with himself and he was near the painting, Lu Laodao felt that the flow of Reiki on the painting was tight and solid. And his ultimate goal was to draw the power of faith into his body to break the inhibition of the snow mountain and ocean of Qi. Li Yunxin knew what he was thinking, so he smiled. That's normal. The water cloud force I taught you is not a common one. After all, you have been a painter for so many years, so it's normal for you to progress quickly in the beginning. Go and hang it up. Lu Laodao thanked him profusely, but he could only sigh at himself for meeting such an amiable and knowledgeable master. He took the painting and ran to the front hall. Although Lu Laodao's Dragon King temple did not have any incense, at least people in the city of Wei knew about it, even if they did not know who lived in the temple. It was a good afternoon and there were many people on the street. Seeing that he asked someone to dismantle the statue, and that he had nothing to do, people spread the news. At this time, even the people in the city did not have much entertainment. Ordinary people could enjoy a day with firecrackers, not to mention dismantling the temple. So when Lu Laodao ran out with the painting, the street in front of the door was already full of people, and the front yard was also crowded. There were women with children, idlers who had nothing to do, and old women who tottered as they walked. At a glance, there were at least 100 of them. Everyone was looking around and discussing, saying that Lu Laodao had lost his mind. Why did he tear apart Lord Dragon King? Originally, it was inconvenient to go to the Sanhika Dragon King temple nearby, so they worshipped here. Although the Dragon King was in charge of the rain, he had great supernatural power and was a deity, who said that he couldn't worship him if he asked for money, children, or the Wang family's second daughter-in-law next door with sores on her face. Now that it was torn down, the people nearby had no place to pay their respects. Therefore, as soon as Lu Laodao came out, he started asking questions. Old Taoist Lu held the painting in one hand and walked into the back door of the front hall. He was already calmly pacing. As he stroked his beard, he lowered his eyes and pressed down. Everyone, please calm down. Today I, Hunyuanzi, am not being disrespectful to Lord Dragon King. Instead, I'm saying that an expert has invited 2 other gods for my Dragon King temple. One of them is the Crown Prince of the 9 Heavens Divine Kingdom. He is the Crown Prince of the 9 Heavens Divine Kingdom, where the Supreme Celestial Being resides. His power is unparalleled, and he can ensure the prosperity of his family, wealth, and many children. The second one is the Crown Prince of the 9 Heavens Dragon Lady, who serves the Crown Prince of the 9 Heavens. She is the elder sister of Lord Dragon King of the Dragon Palace of the Weak Sea. She can control the clouds and rain, and she can ensure the prosperity of the land. From today onwards, my Dragon King temple will worship these 2 gods. My neighbors are blessed. Seeing that there were so many people today, Lu Laodao knew that once this news spread, there would be more people coming to see it. Therefore he was happy and spoke more eloquently. However, these 2 true gods had never seen it before. Naturally they did not buy it. Therefore they hissed and said that Lu Laodao was crazy about money, so he made it up to make money. Old Taoist Lu did not panic and smiled again. He knew the level of the painting in his hand. There were 5 painters of artistic conception in the city of Wei. In fact, he had just touched the edge. He said that the emptiness realm and the artistic conception were both acceptable. However, the other 4 were real experts, at least in the eyes of ordinary people. He also knew that the level of the painting in his hand was probably much higher than that of the other 4 experts combined. Therefore, after smiling, he opened the painting in front of everyone. A whooshing sound was heard, a breath that made one feel relaxed and at the same time odd, like the warm spring wind, instantly swept across the front hall of the Dragon King temple, and then made a circle in the courtyard. The noise stopped instantly. Everyone, young and old, stared with their eyes wide open. Those who were sick and didn't feel very refreshed now felt as light as a swallow again. This was because since they were going to worship the statues, they had to make people feel that they were worthy of worship. Therefore, when Li Yunxin was painting, he added the effect of cleansing the heart and warding off evil. He was also an expert in the transcendent state. Among the painters in the city of Wei, and even among the ordinary painters, he was almost invincible. Of course, it was easy for him to do this. After a moment of silence, a few people who were not mentally strong bent their knees and were about to worship. Lu Laodao was even more proud. He said solemnly, "Now that you have seen the portraits of these two heavenly masters, please don't neglect them. You need to know that everything works if you are sincere. If you are not sincere, even if the Jade Emperor descended to the mortal world, he would not care about you." As he spoke, he stepped on the ladder and hung the portrait behind the incense table. Then, without looking at the crowd, he clasped his hands behind his back and turned to the backyard. But as soon as he got out of the back door, he quickly hid and peeked through the crack of the door. He saw that the neighbors were scrambling to kneel in front of the portrait. The sound of copper coins falling into the merit box was endless. To Lu Laodao it was like heavenly music. There were also those who did not bring money with them, so they quickly ran home, afraid that they would neglect the two heavenly masters. There were even those who had sick people at home, so they carried them over, wanting to experience the heavenly aura of the two heavenly masters. In this era where people died from major illnesses and minor illnesses dragged on, once they experienced the heavenly aura of the temple, it would be more effective than any kind of persuasion or propaganda. By the time the sky turned dark, almost all the neighbors had come to worship. Although the aristocrats did not think much of it, they only thought that it was a rumor spread by the ignorant commoners. But the things that ordinary people did not lack were time and energy. Looking at this scene, Lu Laodao felt as if he had seen a few decades ago, before the Sanhika Dragon King Temple. He grinned from ear to ear, so he happily went to find Li Yunxin to tell him the good news. But just as he walked to the door of Li Yunxin's main room before he stepped in, he heard a shout from inside, "Don't come in!" Lu Laodao quickly stopped. After a while, he heard Li Yunxin say through gritted teeth, "I'm at a critical point in my cultivation, don't disturb me. You eat first." Lu Laodao did not know what was going on with this expert, so he obediently retreated. He wandered around the pool for a while, weighing the money bag at his waist. Seeing that the sky was already dark, he decided to go out from the back door. He went to the Munanju at the corner, cut 2 tails of sauced lamb, a plate of butter peanuts, a plate of salted pork and a pot of air dao too. After he left, the backyard became quiet. But gradually he could hear the sound of people coming to the front yard to offer incense. Li Yunxin sat in the room listening to the sound and gritted his teeth. He felt that he was in a very bad condition. Chapter 35. Although he felt that Lu Laodao was a not bad person, he would not really entrust his life to a person he had only known for a few days. Now he could not move. His comfortable cotton shirt was drenched in sweat, and even the bed he was sitting on was soaked in sweat. Even if there was only the light from the crescent moon in the room, he could see the white fog coming out of his head. At this moment, his ocean of chi and mountain of snow seemed to be about to explode. The name of ocean of chi and mountain of snow was not because it sounded more artistic, nor because there was really something like a snow mountain in his body. This was because when a cultivator practiced, the spiritual power gathered and condensed, and finally integrated with the body to strengthen the cultivator's spirit and life. This part of spiritual power actually formed a part of the cultivator. It was not a separate chi, nor was it something golden that could flow in one's body. It had penetrated into every cell and became a part of the body. When a painter painted, it was this part that referred to the other person's spiritual power or his own. This part referred to the mountain, in the ocean of chi and mountain of snow, a solid foundation. Another part of spiritual power could be used, it depended on how majestic the mountain was. They were separated from the mountain, gathered in the ocean of chi, and used in various forms to become many skills. In fact, if Li Yunxin was asked to name it, he would call it liquid capital. And his ocean of chi and mountain of snow was sealed because the snow on the mountain could not melt and gather in the ocean of chi. He wanted to use the power of wish to break through that layer of restriction. But since there was no exact shape of a mountain in his body, there would not be a cover or seal on it. He needed to use the power of wish to impact his whole body to remove the seal that covered his whole body. But right now, the power of faith and wish from more than 100 people had gathered on him through the spiritual energy channel of the greater Paragon Saint Profound Numinous Treasure Crown Prince Jiawen and Dragon Lady. From the moment he received the power of faith, he realized, damn it, this is bad. The power of will was completely different from the spiritual energy he cultivated. The difference between the two was like the difference between oil and water. This power of wish might not be worth mentioning to a great demon, but if it was converted into spiritual power, it would be nothing to him. But at this moment, although the power of wish was small, it could not be controlled by him, nor could it be expelled from his body. It was as if his body had been pierced by countless steel needles, and he couldn't move at all. It was said that there was a kind of punishment where a person's scalp would be cut open, mercury would be poured in, and a complete piece of human skin would be obtained. At this moment, although the power of will was not tangible mercury, it had the same effect at the level of the soul. The indescribable pain made Li Yunxin clench his teeth. The reason why he continued to insist on not letting Lu Laodao in was because he felt that although the situation was completely different from what he had expected, it seemed to be of some use. While the power of wish was bringing him pain, it was also attacking that restriction. The talisman that was used to cast the restrictive spell was probably made by an expert from a certain orthodoxy. It was very sturdy. But the power of will seemed to be effective. Two different kinds of power attacked, and Li Yunxin could feel that the restriction was loosening bit by bit. But at this moment his pain was almost at his limit. He could only hope that the worshippers outside would quickly disperse, so that he could slowly think of a way to absorb the power of will, and then go to the translucent jade scroll, to check if there was any other way besides easy to obtain. And so he endured for another 2 hours. When he felt that all the water in his body was about to evaporate, there was finally no one in the temple. At this time there was no decent entertainment, and if there was anything fun, it was probably only the fun between husband and wife in bed. Because of this, the earlier people slept, the earlier he was relieved. The power of will did not increase, so he focused his mind and began to try to absorb it. At this time he still did not know that it was taboo for human cultivators to absorb power of will. He only felt that this power came easily. If being worshipped every day could make me stronger, then why not? This power of will was difficult to absorb, just like how oil is difficult to dissolve in water. But he tried again and again and found that since he could not fuse them, he might as well not fuse them. Letting the power of will become a part of the mountain was like mixing oil and water and then shaking it. Although it was still a ball of oil mixed with water, it still became a cup of liquid. After trying this, he felt that he had found the trick. With the power of will mixed in, some spiritual power could leak out. The power of will was like opening small holes one after another on the mountain. He spent an hour to do this and planned to carry it out to the end later. He had cultivated spiritual power for more than 10 years, and this power of will was not even a drop in the ocean for his mountain. He felt that he would need a lot more time to completely deal with the restriction. At this time Lu Laodao came in from the back door. The spring night was not very cold, and there was still the faint fragrance of flowers and trees. Laodao drank some wine and felt his body warm, and the taste of the wine still lingered in his mouth. Then he thought of the additional income from the temple, and his whole body felt comfortable, as if he was soaking in warm water. He closed the back door and while humming sparse shadows slanting across the clear water, faint fragrance floating in the moonlight at dusk, these 2 lines were written by an expert painter 1,000 years ago, he strolled back to his own room. When he reached the pond, he turned to look at the main room where Li Yunxin lived. He found that the room was still dark and quiet. Laodao weighed the beef wrapped in oil paper in his hand, and thought that it was a pity. The master probably went to bed early after practicing. What a pity for this beef. The cow belonged to a farmer's family outside the city, and was killed by a wild beast in the middle of the night. After taking a few bites, it seemed that it was not to his taste, so he stopped eating. The next day the family found the cow dead and reported it to the authorities. The authorities sent people to investigate and confirmed that it was killed by a wild beast, and ordered the family to deal with it themselves. The family did not want to eat it themselves, so they sold it to Munanju for money. Beef was a rare commodity. The beef in Laodao's hand cost 20 cents, 10 portions of mutton. He thought that it would spoil tomorrow, so he might as well take it back to his room and eat it slowly. Alas, it was a pity that he ate too much just now. If he had known this, he would have eaten the beef instead of the mutton. He thought about it in bits and pieces and then turned his head. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly stopped as if his head was about to explode. His scalp went numb and the effects of the wine faded in an instant. He slowly turned his head again and glanced at Li Yunxin's room. He looked at the thing that he seemed to have seen just now. This time he saw it clearly. A woman in white was lying outside Li Yunxin's window. She was lying with her head down, feet on the ground, lying on her stomach. As if she felt his gaze, the woman in white raised her head and looked at him. There were no facial features on her face. Lu Laodao's head buzzed again and he fainted. Chapter 36. After another hour, Li Yunxin finally digested the power of will and let out a long sigh. He slowly let go of his legs. When they were no longer numb and painful, he slowly got down to the ground. He took off his wet and dry clothes, opened the mahogany box with brass edges, and found a clean set of clothes to wear. He was about the same height as Lu Laodao and also about the same weight. Lu Laodao's Taoist robe also fitted him well. There was no light in the room, only the faint moonlight. But cultivators' bodies were also tempered by spiritual energy, and most of them had sharp ears and eyes. Therefore Li Yunxin could see clearly without a light. Not to mention that the light was not very bright, there was also a smoky smell in the room which he still could not get used to. He poured a cup of herbal tea and drank it. It did not quench his thirst, so he lifted the teapot and drank it. When he looked up, he saw the window. He choked on the tea and the teapot fell to the ground. He was so scared that he shivered from head to toe. What the hell is a ghost? He was not afraid of ghosts. But no matter how brave he was, he could not help but suddenly see such a scene. Because the room was dark, the shadow outside the window was especially clear. A figure, head down, body up, was leaning against the window. Long hair hung down and it was even slightly fluttering. This shadow was fainter than normal shadows and it seemed to be a little translucent. But Li Yunxin could also see its movements clearly. It was scratching at the paper window as if it wanted to come in. Holy shit. Li Yunxin stood firm and stared at the thing with wide eyes. He knew that it could be a ghost. Apart from the illusion created by the little cat demon in the forest, this was the first time he saw a ghost. He had seen ghosts before, but he could only feel that they were yin spirits like the cat demon. But this was the first time he really saw one. For cultivators, the existence of ghosts was certain. There were naturally ways to see ghosts, using special drugs or practicing some kind of supernatural power, such as opening the inner eye. But the problem was, who would find trouble for themselves and do that? The spiritual energy of cultivators could already sense and locate them. No one would take things too hard and insist on watching all kinds of tragic appearances before death. But now Li Yunxin felt that he had indeed seen it. This was a temple. There was also the power of faith from incense. Let's not talk about why he suddenly saw a ghost. What kind of ghost would take things too hard and run into the temple? He was stunned for a long time but still walked to the door and opened it. He pushed the door open and looked to the side. The female ghost happened to turn around and look at him. His face was devoid of features. His body was dripping with blood. She straightened her neck in an extremely strange posture and scrutinized him carefully. Li Yunxin looked into the courtyard again and saw Lu Laodao lying on the ground. He ignored the ghost and quickly walked to Lu Laodao's side, squatted down and picked up his hand to feel his pulse. Lu Laodao was 54 this year. In this era he should be an old man with a great-grandson. If it was an ordinary person at this age, they might have fallen ill and died from the shock. But fortunately, although he was a painter in the secular world, he also practiced some methods to refine qi, so his body was much better than that of ordinary people. His body was fine, but he had fainted. Only then did Li Yunxin notice the oily paper package in his hand. He opened it and saw that it was beef with soy sauce. Then a strange feeling arose in his heart. Because he knew that this was probably for him. Other than his parents in this world, this was the third person who was good to him? For a moment he was a little dazed. Because of certain experiences in his previous life, Li Yunxin couldn't understand the concept of kindness very well. In this life, although he could feel it and accept it, to go one step further was indeed a little more difficult. After all, in his previous life it was, thinking of these things, his chest felt irritated and he stopped thinking about it. He held the oily paper package in his left hand and stood up, picking up a piece of beef and chewing it carefully. He raised his head and asked the ghost, "Why are you looking for me?" At this time, the ghost was still lying on the window, but its neck was twisted at a strange angle, and its featureless face was still facing him. It swayed slightly, as if it was looking at him repeatedly to confirm something. Li Yunxin was a little impatient. He had ways to deal with this kind of ghost, even if this one was a special kind. After death, the soul of a person would be taken away by Yanjun. The two Yama kings were powerful, and it was not difficult for them to transform into billions of people. But occasionally, under special circumstances, the ghost would temporarily not enter the cycle of reincarnation, and would linger in the world. Usually the ghost would retain the appearance of the moment before death. But if the body was taken over by something after death, the ghost would become a faceless ghost. Right now he could already use some spiritual power. Although he couldn't fully use the power of the transcendent state, as a painting Taoist, who was trained in the intent realm or emptiness realm, he was far better than the artists in the intent realm or emptiness realm in the secular world. He clasped two of his fingers together and drew a line in the air, using his spiritual power to construct a restriction. With just a slight flick of his wrist, he would be able to teach this ghost a lesson. Ghosts were not human. No matter how smart and experienced they were when they were alive, they would be muddle-headed when they became ghosts. After all, humans had a spirit when they were alive, and a part of the spirit was hidden in the physical body. Without the physical body, the spirit would be damaged and naturally a lot of the spirit would be lost. Therefore, if one wanted to communicate with these ghosts happily most of the time, he had to tame them like a beast and make them suffer before they would speak obediently. However, just as he was about to flick his fingers, Li Yunxin noticed the forehead of this faceless ghost. It was a little red. His heart skipped a beat and he remembered how Qiao Jessen died that night. She was poked on the forehead by a swordsman. Then he looked at the blood stain on her body. Wasn't it a blood stain between her stomach and abdomen? It was Qiao Jessen's ghost. It was not a random dream that day. He really saw Black Bai Yanjun in his dream. The two Yama kings said that he seemed to be the person who killed the Sen Luo temple 1,000 years ago, and then left in a hurry. They also said that the souls of those who were related to him were not restricted. They really were not restricted. He quickly released the simple restriction on his fingers. You are Qiao Jessen? Are you Qiao Jessen? However, after asking this question, the ghost suddenly froze. Then it suddenly raised its head and looked to the north. Then, using its hands and feet, it crawled to the back of the house at a speed that made one's hair stand on end. Li Yunxin hurriedly shouted, "Wait!" He gathered his spiritual energy and jumped up to the roof. However, there were only 3 or 4 rows of early spring vegetables behind the house, and the ghost was nowhere to be seen. Although the city at this time was big, it could not be compared to the big cities in his previous world. Recently, the weather was relatively dry and there was no pollution, so the visibility was good. In addition, because of his cultivation, his eyesight was excellent. Therefore, when he stood on the roof and turned to glance in the direction that the ghost was looking at, he found that there were sparks of fire outside the city. The fire was very weak, so it should be very far away. It was probably on the outskirts of the city where farmers lived. Someone lit a torch in such a night. Perhaps something had happened, someone died in someone's house, or someone had been robbed. Li Yunxin did not know if the fire had anything to do with the ghost's departure, so he sighed slightly and jumped down from the house. Perhaps he would come again, he thought. Chapter 37. He carried Lu Laodao into the house and settled him down. He estimated that Lu Laodao would wake up early in the morning. Then he sat beside him in a daze. As a former psychiatrist, he knew that his current condition was not normal. He was anxious. Things were progressing smoothly at the moment, but there were still 1 or more major crises waiting to be unleashed. The 9th young master might come looking for him. It was not a good thing. He might die. Bai Yunxin might come looking for him. It was not a good thing either. He might die. Now that Bai Yunxin had gone to look for the 9th young master, the best outcome would be 2 big demons fighting and one of them would be killed. Li Yunxin still remembered Bai Yunxin's reaction that night. It was not the reaction of someone who heard the whereabouts of an old friend. The worst outcome would be that both of them would come looking for him. He could not imagine that scenario. In fact, other than that, the Jade Scroll of Enlightenment. He might not have seen it, but he knew that Dao Tong and Kenzo had all kinds of magical means. The 3 head disciples of the Kenzo sect had already caused him a lot of trouble, not to mention the grotto heavens above the sections. In the entire cultivation world, the 3 arrogant disciples of the sect leader were probably only equivalent to the grassroots civil servants in cities and towns. If the entire cultivation world knew that he had the Jade Scroll of Enlightenment, he would not be able to protect it if the entire cultivation world came to snatch it. He might even lose his life. People in the secular world always liked to think of those cultivators with profound abilities as gods, but they did not know that the heart character of the divine will Dharma was the cultivation of the heart. However, it was not the heart of compassion rumored by the ignorant people in the secular world, but the supreme forgetfulness. The 5 states of cultivation were Xuanzhen and void transformation. When one reached the transcendent state, one had to focus on the cultivation of the heart and the cultivation of the emotions. If one wanted to go further, to the true state and the profound state, there were even more tribulations of inner demons waiting for them. If one wanted to go through those tribulations, one had to forget the emotions. One less emotion meant one less tribulations. When one abandoned all human emotions, it would be this supreme forgetfulness state, which was above the 5 states of Xuanzhen and void transformation. At that time, his divine soul and physical body would be tempered to an incomparably tyrannical level, and he would be able to ascend. But that was only in theory. This was because it had indeed been close to 3,000 years since anyone had ascended to heaven. Li Yunxin didn't know what kind of real experience it was to be in the state of supreme oblivion, although he could understand a little because of his special experience in his previous life. However, he knew for sure that the higher the cultivation of those people, the less merciful they would be. It was not that they were evil people. In fact, they had to abandon even the emotion of doing evil. They just become heartless. Like a machine, it calculates all the gains and losses and obtains the optimal solution. As for whether they would harm others in the process of obtaining the optimal solution, that was not something they cared about. Because sympathy is also an emotion. Sometimes Li Yunxin would wonder what kind of state it was. When one reached that realm, he would have the ability to move mountains and fill oceans, but without the 7 emotions and 6 desires, what was the use of that? No matter what, once he was targeted by those people, he would probably be in a miserable state. Those people must have been looking for him. So that day when the thunderstorm came, not long after, someone came knocking on his door. That thunderstorm was also a mystery. And his own parents could actually carry this jade scroll and live in seclusion for more than 10 years without being discovered. Thinking about it, he also felt that this matter was unfathomable. But such unfathomable parents were killed by a thunderstorm overnight. Every time he thought about this, he felt a chill all over his body. What kind of existence had set its eyes on him? Was it still watching him now? But at least he knew that he still had a trump card. Without him, those people couldn't open this jade scroll. No matter how powerful they were, no matter how smart they were, no matter how knowledgeable they were, no matter how experienced they were, they still couldn't open it. Because that wasn't something that the people of this world could do. Li Yunxin sighed and rubbed his face hard. Outside the house, the sound of insects gradually rose, and the bamboo leaves rustled in the breeze. He picked up the packet of spiced beef again, eating it piece by piece as he walked out the door. He had to make some preparations. The demons and cultivators of this world were indeed powerful, but he had something that those people didn't understand. Inner demons were the scariest. On the same night, across the street, the Qiao family's Qiao Duanhong's bedroom was brightly lit. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't awake either. He lay on the bed in the main room like a broken puppet, his body exuding a thick smell of medicine. His wounds were covered with medicinal herbs and Jinshuang medicine, and then wrapped with bandages using an unprofessional method. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes closed. If it weren't for the occasional rise and fall of his chest, he would be no different from a corpse. An old servant stood by his bedside, his white hair disheveled as if he hadn't combed it for several days. The old man's face was covered in wrinkles, and one of his eyes was blind, a murky white. He was holding a towel in his hand. The place where it was held was still wet, but the rest of it was already dry. This meant that he had been sitting here for a long time, or perhaps, he had fallen asleep leaning against the side of the bed. It wasn't until 2 hours later, when the sound of the night watch could be heard from the back street, that the old man suddenly woke up and looked up at Qiao Duanhong. He still hadn't woken up. He reached out to touch the man's forehead. It was still very hot. The old man struggled to get up, washed the towel in the copper basin beside the bed, and changed it before walking to the door and pushing it open. The sound of the door opening woke up the 2 servants guarding outside the room. The old man sighed. You've slept for the whole night. Have you brewed the medicine? The 2 servants wiped their saliva and looked at each other. We're going now. Don't worry, Master Meng. Then the 2 of them hurried away, whispering as they walked and glancing at the west courtyard. There were sounds of people laughing in the west courtyard. There were men and women and the sounds of people talking in high and low voices. The wind of the spring night blew the smell of alcohol over. They were drinking in the courtyard at night. The old man stooped and looked in that direction with his remaining eye before closing the door again. He knew that the 2 servants wouldn't brew the medicine. There was no medicine to brew. He had used his own money to hire a doctor for the past 2 days for Dalong. But he didn't have much money to begin with, and it was all used up. Those 2 shameless women and Xiao Jiaming didn't care. Not only did they not care, but they also wanted to let Dalong fend for himself. There were more than 30 people in the Qiao family's courtyard, and they all counted on this escort agency to make a living. Now Dalong took people out on this trip and all of them died. Only he came back and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The old man thought, sometimes he even thought, Dalong might as well have died there. If they all died together, perhaps this family wouldn't be like this and Dalong wouldn't have to lie on the bed like this, listening to those two shameless women and that scoundrel having fun. Dalong's first wife, that Xiao Wenshi, was a good woman. Unfortunately she died early. She only left behind a daughter who had also gone crazy and was locked in the back. A daughter. She was still a daughter. This old man couldn't care about her for the time being. He just pitied Dalong. He watched Dalong grow up. At that time he was still an escort. In the 13th year of Guangyuan, when they encountered bandits on the road, he blocked a knife and a sword for the old escort leader. Chapter 38. One saber cut off one of his eyes and one sword cut off one of his legs. Then he was asked to stay in the escort agency by the old head. At that time he said in front of everyone, "Whatever I, Chao Fengchun, eat, Meng Ao will eat. When I, Chao Fengchun, am gone, Meng Ao will be your uncle." But how could he really do that? If he didn't do the escort work, he would stay in the Chao family to manage things, watch the younger generation grow up and give them ideas. When Dalong could take care of things on his own, he spoke even less. After all, he was a cripple and it had been more than 20 years since that incident. Dalong still treated him like an uncle and he didn't dare to accept it. The servants and maids in the courtyard were all children. They only knew that he was an elder in the family, but they didn't respect him, a blind and crippled man. Until now. Almost all the men in the family died during this escort trip. The orphans, widows and women were left behind. On one hand they hoped that the two women would give them some money to survive, but on the other hand they resented Dalong. He had lived for a long time and he knew what those people said behind his back. Why is he the only one back? He brought so many people to die, why isn't he dead? The fickleness of human nature, and the fickleness of the world. The two escorts he was on good terms with took a look, and when they saw that Dalong wasn't going to make it, they left behind 10 ingots of silver and never came again. He could only use his own money to hire a doctor for Dalong. He held on to his last breath, waiting for the people from Qing'an to come. The Chao family had a distant branch in Qing'an, and there were still some elders with high seniority in the family. He quietly sent someone to send a letter asking them to come. He couldn't let the family property fall into the hands of Qiao Jiaming, that bastard, and the two prostitutes. The old man thought for a while, then walked to the bedside and reached out to touch Qiao Duanhong's forehead. It was even hotter. His cheeks were a terrible gray color, his eyelids were trembling and his lips were cracked. He still had to use medicine. The old man thought for a while, then limped to the west courtyard. The closer he got, the clearer the voice became. She heard the beast say proudly, "When the prefectural magistrate sees that piece of jade, he said everything he could do, it has already been. Why not send it to the prefectural magistrate?" "I was just joking, I can also keep it as a concubine," and the little whore's laughter. "That old cripple is guarding it? Let's see how many days they can hold out. Wait for death." The old man felt a tightness in his chest. He covered his mouth with his hand and coughed hoarsely. He felt that the web between his thumb and forefinger was warm and moist. Without even looking, he wiped it away forcefully. He knew it was blood. Being angered by these three beasts to the point of vomiting blood. Even if he was old, he was still old and useless. The three people inside had drunk too much and their eyes and ears were no longer useful. Therefore he coughed but did not hear it. He walked to the door but did not hear it. He pushed open the door to the courtyard, but he still couldn't hear anything. The three of them were drinking wine in a pavilion in the courtyard. At this moment, Madame Qiao's clothes were disheveled and she was lying in Qiao Jiaming's arms. The old man's vision darkened, and he reached out to hold on to the door frame. Madame Qiao was newly married the year before last. Madame Qiao had no children for 10 years, so the Qiao family had to have a descendant. Meng Ao found out that this woman had something to do with that beast a month ago, so he wanted to give Qiao Duanhong some advice after this trip. Unexpectedly, such a thing happened. At this moment he had done this dirty thing in front of Madame Qiao. Madame Qiao didn't look at them. She drank the wine slowly and lowered her head to say, "That old cripple is restless. Send a letter to Qing'an. Let's not talk about whether I can send it or not. If I send it to Qing'an, it's not as useless as that dead guy. They are both from aristocratic families in Wulin. It's said that they are the richest men in Qing'an. How can they like this place? Besides, that old cripple is old. Who will send it? Ask Wang Qi to send it." "Who is Wang Qi?" The old cripple doesn't know that he is a distant relative of my maternal cousin. After saying this, she covered her mouth and laughed. She turned her face and saw Meng Ao at the door. But after a little surprise, she squinted, picked up the wine glass and asked lightly, "Oh, old Meng, why are you here? Is Dalong all right?" He didn't send the letter. Meng Ao felt that his chest was more stuffy and he felt dizzy. He lowered his eyes to avoid looking at their ugly behavior, held the door and forced himself to turn around and walk back. But when he took a step, the smell of wine, meat and cosmetics in the pavilion hit him, and he felt that he couldn't suppress the fire in his heart anymore. He coughed with all his strength and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then he couldn't hold the door and fell down. When he woke up again, he found himself in Dalong's room. On the ground. It seemed that they found someone to carry him in, and then they left him alone. There were originally 9 servants. These days 4 were dismissed and only 5 were kept. A cook, 2 maids and 2 manservants. The 2 maids looked at Xiao Jiasin, and the 2 manservants looked at him. In fact, they were waiting for Dalong to die. He must have fainted not long ago. It was still dark. He looked outside the door. The 2 manservants were still guarding and the door was opened a little. The old man slowly climbed up from the ground, and panted for a while before walking to Dalong's bed. He looked worse, as if he was dead. The old man quickly reached out to touch his forehead, and found that the fever had subsided. Dalong's fever was no longer and his forehead was cold. This reminded him of his dead son. At that time the corpse was fished out of the river and it was the same temperature. He stared at Dalong's face for a while and then pulled the quilt. He didn't send the letter. And the magistrate. He couldn't use it. Meng Ao felt that his body was no longer stuffy or hot. He suddenly felt very comfortable and his heart was as calm as water. He thought for a while and then turned to the door. The 2 manservants quickly stood up, rubbed their eyes and reached out to stop him. "Oh, Master Meng, you are not well. First grandmother told you to rest in the room for a while and don't go out tonight?" The old man looked at them silently for a while. The 2 manservants were surprised to find that his only eye was not so cloudy anymore. It became scorching hot and bright. This kind of brightness made them feel uneasy. This light should not belong to this old man. In the 3 or 4 years since they came to the Chow family, this old man had never spoken loudly. He only smiled kindly at everyone with a hunched back and a lame leg. This kind of uneasiness made them feel a subtle and ashamed anger. They pushed the old man hard and raised their voice. "Go in. I'm talking to you nicely, don't be ungrateful. This is not the Chow family with the dead man inside." The old man held the door frame and did not fall. He said hoarsely, "The escort leader is gone." The 2 manservants looked at each other and sneered. "Why are you worried about this? Worry about yourself." Meng Ao nodded and turned to go into the room. "Old man. His brain is not bright and he can't think straight." The manservant in the green hat turned around and shook his head. "I don't want to hurt him. Let me tell you, I have learned martial arts for a few days." Before he finished, they heard the door creak again. The 2 men turned their heads at the same time, and their faces were full of impatience. "I say you." Before they finished speaking, there was a whistling sound in the air. A thick, gold-threaded machete was chopping at the manservant's face. With a dong sound, the machete was embedded half a palm thick. The huge pressure caused his 2 eyeballs to pop out and hang on the side of his face. Then blood also spurted out. The manservant in the green hat stared at the machete, and his body could not move because of the sudden shock and fear. This machete was Qiao Duanhong's machete. It was hanging on the wall of his room. He moved his eyeballs with difficulty and saw the person holding the machete. It was the old cripple. But his face was as cold as iron, and there was a light in his eyes that he had never seen before. "Ayu." He uttered a few words and subconsciously reached out to grab the machete. However, a cold light flashed and there was a poochie sound. His head rolled down the steps as well. The old man put away the machete, leaned on the ground and panted tiredly for a while. Then he reached out to wipe the blood on the machete and slowly wiped it on his face and smiled. His teeth and one eye shone in the darkness. "You children. When this old man was your age I was called Man-Killer Fiend Meng Ao's." Chapter 39. The old man with white hair and beard, nicknamed Man-Killer Fiend when he was young, felt his chest heaving up and down like a bellows. After unleashing 2 powerful strikes, he felt his arms trembling, his heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. But his body was once again filled with boiling hot blood. He once again experienced that kind of self-indulgent, destructive pleasure. He remembered a long time ago when he beheaded someone in the rain. Hot blood splashed on his face just like right now. The blood made his skin tense up, the slightly sweet smell of blood alerted him. He also remembered how in the past few decades he watched De Lang grow up, marry a wife, have children, take charge of his own affairs. He was a cripple, a servant, but he felt like De Lang was his own son. But now he had nothing. He felt like he was being hollowed out. But the emptiness was quickly filled by something else. The viciousness and brutality that had been suppressed by certain emotions erupted like a hidden volcano. Man-killer fiend Meng Ao stood up straight and closed his eyes. A long and heavy breathing sound came from his chest. A minute later, he opened his eyes and grunted. The joints all over his body crackled, and the old man who straightened his back seemed to have grown a few feet taller in an instant. The 7-killing blade that he had pushed to its peak was burning away his life force. This tyrannical scripture that he obtained by chance when he was young, the one that made him famous, had now become a deadly poison, a burning flame. He slowly breathed out. The white mist pierced through the night sky like a dragon. 3 breaths later, the old man easily picked up the 13 kilograms thick blade and headed towards the west courtyard. After a few steps, he saw a maid walking towards him. The maid was originally looking at Qiao Jiesin. But Qiao Jiesin didn't make a fuss at all. The two of them were both tired and hungry. So she went to the kitchen to make something to eat. But in the darkness, she could hear the sound of running water, as well as faintly see the old man's snow-white hair and beard illuminated by the moonlight. The tired maid snorted in her mind, hurriedly walked away while muttering, "Old thing, you scared me so much in the middle of the night." After another 3 steps, she could see the old man clearly. He saw the blood on the old man's face. The young maid subconsciously stopped in her tracks. She thought for a moment and was about to call out. However, the old man had already walked to her side. He did not stop, nor did he look at her. He merely raised his hand. The knife rose and the head fell. He continued to walk forward. The smell of blood permeated the spring night breeze, mingling with the fragrance of wine, meat, and cosmetics. Meng Ao walked to the door of the west courtyard and pushed it open. Lewd words and laughter attacked him again, but they could no longer beat him down. He limped towards the pavilion with a burning desire. The night wind blew. The candlelight in the pavilion flickered. The tip of the sword fell to the ground, and the metal scratched the stone floor with an ear-piercing sound. The 3 of them finally turned around. Even the slowest person could sense that there was something unusual about the old man. At this moment, Madame Qiao finally recalled what Qiao Duanhong had inadvertently mentioned. Lord Meng is getting older and older these past few years. He didn't have a good temper when he was young. It's called a man-killer fiend. Don't be fooled by Master Meng's current state. He came to the escort agency because he had nowhere else to go. You've never seen him fight, right? He's a good fighter. At the moment he was inexplicably frightened. He stared straight at the blood on his face, raised his finger to point at him and screamed in disbelief. Did you kill someone? Did you kill someone? Yes, I killed someone. The old man with white hair and beard said in such a strange tone and hoarse voice. He used to talk like this when he was young. You haven't killed enough. He took 2 steps forward. He walked very slowly, but not to deliberately create a sense of oppression or to play a game of cat and mouse. It was because the overbearing power of the 7-killing broadsword was about to overdraw his vitality. Dalong left just now. You 2 have to accompany him. He finally stepped on the steps and saw the 3 people's frightened faces. Qiao Jiaming blinked his drunken eyes for a long time, and then realized that the old man with a big knife was only 3 steps away from him. He trembled with fear, pushed Madame Qiao away as if he had been electrocuted, and wanted to escape in a panic. You can go. The old man shouted in a low voice and waved the knife. The blade cut through the air, and the iron rings on the back of the knife clattered. The blade first cut the white gauze curtain between the 2 people, and then passed through Madame Qiao's arm, making a long cut. Then, the knife suddenly slowed down. It was as if a dragon had suddenly lost its ability to fly, and it fell heavily onto the stone table. The sound of broken cups and bowls mixed with the sound of the 3 people running away in panic. Madame Qiao screamed loudly and Qiao Jiaming screamed even louder. But after the 3 people howled for a while, they suddenly realized, the old man was silent. And then they heard the sound of the heavy knife falling to the ground. When they looked back in shock, they found that the old man had fallen to the ground. His forehead first hit the edge of the table, then hit the stone bench and then fell to the ground. The blood that spurted from his mouth and overflowed from his forehead dyed his beard and hair red. He looked like he was dead. Qiao Jiaming froze for a while, then he pushed away Madame Qiao, who was crying and shouting that she was going to die. He kicked Meng Ao with his toes. Seeing that he didn't respond and didn't seem to be cheating, he walked over and bent down to check his breath. Then he withdrew his hand and gritted his teeth. This old killer. He's still alive. He's rebelling. Kill him. As he said, he picked up the knife on the ground with the help of the wine. But after all, he was hollowed out by wine and women, and he drank too much. Besides, the knife was heavy. He tried to pick it up, but he couldn't. Then he heard Madame Qiao holding the mahogany pillar of the pavilion and said in a trembling voice, "Forget it. Let him live first. Tie him up and send him to the prefectural magistrate. Dalong is dead. Meng Ao is dead. Just in time. The servant colluded with foreign bandits. Anyway, I heard that he was also a thief when he was young. Prefectural magistrate Li. Didn't he say he wanted to find a reason? Here he is. The old servant colluded with foreign bandits?" Qiao Jiaming widened his eyes. Who will believe such a thing? It's because it's hard to believe that it's true. Stupid. Madame Qiao looked at Qiao Jiaming with a gloomy face and then looked at Madame Qiao, who was crying. Besides, this old thing. Who is he close to? Have you forgotten? Qiao Jiaming blinked. Alas. Madame Qiao sighed. That Lu Laodao. Didn't the two of them often drink together? Don't you want the Dragon King Temple in the back street? Didn't Prefectural Magistrate Li say the day before yesterday that there was no reason to kill him? Then I got it. At this time, Qiao Jiaming clapped his hands and completely forgot the fright just now. Under the influence of alcohol, he became complacent again. After being complacent for a while, he gritted his teeth and said, well, I'm thinking about it. Humph, I didn't want to embarrass the old man. But that boy. Well, what's his name again? Whatever his name is. I haven't even laid a finger on Jessen yet, but he even hit me that day. I can tell from his greasy hair and powdered face that he is not a good guy. Lu Laodao's apprentice? Hey, I know those dirty things. What Taoist boy? Isn't he just for fun? Those who talk about cultivation, humph, which one of them doesn't have a few soft and tender little rabbits? What's his name? His name is... Oh. Madame Qiao frowned slightly. It seemed that she didn't like to hear him say these words. You can't say this kind of thing when you go to the court in the future. Keep your mouth shut. This time, Prefectural Magistrate Li is short of money, so he likes the Dragon King Temple. In normal times, as a prefectural magistrate, he earns thousands of taels of silver a year. How can he make trouble for a house? What you should say is not the boy. What you should say is that all the people in our Qiao family's escort agency are dead, but he, Lao Dao, and a boy are unharmed. Then when they come back, the servant who is on good terms with Lao Dao first killed the head of the family and wanted to kill the madam. After the prefectural magistrate interrogated them carefully, he learned that it was Lu Laodao and Meng Ao who colluded with foreign bandits because of the money. Remember it well. Don't be clueless again when the time comes. Qiao Jiaming waved his hand impatiently. Hey, women always think too much. Lu Laodao and that boy are just ordinary people. If the prefectural magistrate wants to handle the case, he just needs to find an excuse to arrest them and beat them 50 times. Even a man made of iron will confess. Why do you talk so much? So many things happened in the house across the street, but Li Yunxin didn't know it until 7 days later. When Lu Laodao woke up the next day, he said in a daze that he saw a ghost last night, but he was afraid that he was drunk and had a hallucination. Li Yunxin simply told him that it was true. When he went out, he only saw that Lu Laodao turned a few times in the same place and then passed out. In this way, it was better than explaining more things to him. Then there was the painful process of trying to break through the inhibition every day. On the second day there were a little more people coming to worship, but on the third day there were gradually fewer people. After all, it was an inconspicuous temple. Even if the neighbors knew about it and came, the news wouldn't spread very fast. It would probably take some time before the news of the true spirit of the Dragon King Temple appeared, would gradually spread to more people. After all, it was not the era of information explosion like before. Since they were all in the city of Wei, it was not strange that someone somewhere in the city would only know about what happened today after a year. But this was also a good thing for Li Yunxin. The incense in the temple gradually became stronger, and it could be a long stream. Then he could slowly adapt and get used to it so that he wouldn't feel like he was about to explode. He learned to use the little bit of wacken that he could already mobilize to wrap the incense and the power of wish and collect it into his snow mountain. He used the power of wish to drill holes one after another on the snow mountain, and felt that the wagon he could use was increasing day by day. 3 days later, he could already endure the pain and walk around with a normal expression. But his steps would be slower and his face would be paler. Some pilgrims occasionally saw Li Yunxin. They were surprised that Lao Dao had a little disciple, and they were also surprised at his handsomeness. Some women secretly said that Lu Lao Dao had no children, and this little Taoist would probably inherit his mantle. He looked good and he had a house and the temple had income, so he was a good match. But this little Taoist didn't look good, and they didn't know if he would have many diseases in the future. Li Yunxin looked older than his actual age. So 2 days later a matchmaker really came to ask him. Of course he laughed and refused. This was because he had been in public a lot recently. When he stayed in the mountain village he only saw the villagers. Now that he came to the city of Wei, the Shanghai of this world, of course he wanted to see how the people here lived. He was a psychiatrist in his previous life and he loved to see people, and it was still the same now. So during the day he played the role of Lu Lao Dao, as disciple, sweeping the courtyard and arranging the incense and candles. He exchanged a few words with some familiar faces and nodded his head. Then he moved a stool and sat in a corner of the front yard, watching the pilgrims come and go in a daze. Others thought he was in a daze, but he was actually attacking his own inhibition and thinking how to deal with the ninth young master by Yunxin and the possible dangers. Looking at people at this time would always give him some good ideas. People were really interesting creatures. But he didn't expect that before these big dangers came, another trouble came to him. The Qiao family. On the morning of the 7th day after he saw Qiao Jiesen's faceless ghost, there weren't as many people as there were a few days ago. Every morning Miss Yin, who sold tofu on the street, would come to burn incense and make a wish. Miss Yin was the name Li Yunxin used to call her. The girl would glance at Li Yunxin with a smile and shyness. "Oh, call me Yin Shuerua." In fact, Miss Yin was not bad. Probably because of the word snow in her name, she was extremely white. He could see the light blue blood vessels under her neck, and her thick eyelashes cast shadows on her snow-white cheeks in the sunlight, like 2 butterfly wings. She had a slender and petite figure. Li Yunxin couldn't see her legs through the cloth skirt, but just by looking at her figure she would probably be the kind of little stunner who would be chased and pampered by people in his era. Fair and beautiful, she could be considered rich on this street. The last time she burned incense, it was equivalent to 200 yuan in RMB in his era. He thought about it. A girl who threw out 200 yuan every morning, 6,000 yuan in a month without even blinking her eyes. What kind of fair and rich beauty was she? But such a girl in novels and legends was just a tofu beauty, the most inconspicuous ordinary character in the story. Every time he thought about it he felt more and more interested. Looking at things with one's own eyes and looking at things with other people's eyes were indeed different. On this morning Miss Yin came to burn incense as usual, and as usual walked to Li Yunxin's side and said, "Good morning, little Taoist." Lu Lao Dao frowned and walked in from the front door. When he raised his head and saw Li Yunxin, his face turned bitter. Then he walked to Li Yunxin like a child begging for candy but afraid of being rejected by an adult. "Brother Xen, something happened." Chapter 40. Lu Lao Dao's life these days was quite enjoyable. The temple had an income from incense and he had more money in his pocket, so he could do anything he wanted. Therefore, when Li Yunxin saw him like this, she knew that he wasn't trying to show off. Something had really happened. Lao Dao was full of worries and seemed to only have eyes for Li Yunxin. Therefore, he completely ignored Miss Yin's presence and said blankly, "Brother Xen, I have an old friend who was sent to prison. The old man from the Qiao family. I heard that he's been tortured beyond recognition. Brother Xen, you're very capable, think about it." Speaking up to this point, he realized that there was someone else beside him and quickly stopped. Miss Yin had already heard these words and looked at Li Yunxin with curiosity and surprise. So he wasn't Lao Dao's disciple? And from the sound of it, not only was he not a disciple, but he was also someone that Lu Lao Dao had to beg. Miss Yin thought of this but didn't continue to think about it. Instead, it was because of the subtle feelings that a little girl had for the person she liked. She coughed softly and said softly, "Don't panic, Master Dao. Did your friend take it for the authorities? Since he's from the Qiao family, he must have been taken by our Nanha prefecture in this city. My uncle works in the prefecture. Although he's only a constable, he has some say. If it's not a big deal." The old Taoist sighed. "Ai, Miss Yin?" "Thank you, Miss Yin. It's not a small matter. The main family accused him of murder and wanted to kill the matriarch. They said that the prefectural magistrate was furious and personally ordered someone to take it. I went to see the Chiao family but they didn't open the door. I heard that 3 people were killed. Sai. Why would old Meng do this? I don't believe it, Sai. Miss Yin raised her hand to cover her mouth and softly said, "Ah." She wanted to say, "Master Dao, how could you have such a cruel friend?" But she looked at Li Yunxin and didn't say it. Finally she said regretfully, "Ah, it's the prefectural magistrate." Lao Dao frowned and cupped his hands at her. She curtsied as well. Actually, Lao Dao wanted to say, "Ah, thank you, but we still have something to talk about. Please take care, I won't see you out." Who would have thought that this young lady would politely return the salute, but she did not leave. She only looked at Li Yunxin. She is curious why Lao Dao doesn't care about people like her uncle, but asks Brother Xan to think of a way. Who is Brother Xan? What could he do? Could he be the young master of a noble family? But why would he stay in this small temple? However, Li Yunxin understood why this girl was so free and rich. The city of Wei, in his previous world it was probably a municipality. The division of the 4 mansions in the city of Wei was roughly equivalent to the prefecture-level cities where he came from. Miss Yin's uncle was a constable in Nanhe Prefecture, and could be considered the director of the Public Security Bureau of a prefecture-level city. He was a person who could summon wind and rain in every city. Even if all the power was actually in the hands of the chief officer, he could still be considered as a senior government official in the hearts of the people. The constable of her uncle and the constable of Constable Xing were 2 completely different concepts. Li Yunxin slightly frowned and thought for a while. He raised his head, looked at Miss Yin and then looked at Lu Lao Dao and gently shook his head. Things are not right. The old servant killed the mistress of the house, and had already killed 3 servants. No matter in which country or era, it should be regarded as a sensational event. However, even Miss Yin, a fair, rich and beautiful girl who loved to wander around and chat, only knew about it at this time. It could be seen that this matter was previously kept a secret. Even a slow-witted person would think that the Chiao family, the murder, Lu Lao Dao, and the old servant were probably not right when these factors were linked together. Not to mention a person like Li Yunxin. It took him 5 seconds to sort out his thoughts, and another 15 seconds to deduce the ins and outs of the matter. In the end, the truth of the matter had already become one of the possibilities that he had sorted out. There were many clues to follow. For example, the words that person said when he first met Xiao Jiaming, the purpose was to slander him and ruin his cousin's reputation. In such an era where cousins were a match made in heaven, it was obvious what he was planning. Later, when he spoke to the 2 Madams Chiao, he saw the interesting subtle expressions on Madame Chiao Jr.'s face. He did not expect that there would be such a dirty matter in the Chiao family's not very big house. But those things were done by others, and he was not a hot-blooded chivalrous person with a strong sense of justice. It was fine if he knew some of it and he did not want to delve into it. But he did not expect that now, after asking a few more questions, he was even more certain of his deduction. The news had only been released today. No wonder Lu Lao Dao did not hide it from Miss Yin, because she would also know very soon. She actually did not hear about such a rare matter from her uncle. It could be seen that the secrecy was done very well. There was something fishy going on. It seemed that he was the one who had the idea. Lunatic. Just go and plot for your family's wealth and fight among yourselves. Why must you court death? Sighing softly in his heart, he turned to Miss Yin and said, "Miss, let me show you something." The topic changed so quickly that the girl and Lao Dao were slightly stunned. But Li Yunxin had already taken her hand and drew a few lines on her palm. He said to her with a smile, "Feel it carefully. What did I draw?" Then he let go. Lao Dao and the girl were even more stunned. Miss Yin opened her mouth slightly and uttered an "ah" for a long time before realizing that it would be embarrassing. She quickly lowered her head. What's wrong with him? Why did he suddenly take my hand? What did he write? Oh my God, did he do something to me? What he wrote on my hand was, What was written on my hand was, What hand? Oh. What happened just now? Miss Yin slowly raised her head and saw Lu Lao Dao. She covered her mouth as if she was startled. Master Dao, when did you come back? Brother Xan, I'm leaving. After saying this, she hurriedly ran out of the temple. She didn't even know why she was so flustered. It was as if something extraordinary had happened just now. Lu Lao Dao blinked for a long time. This? Mind-losing talisman. Li Yunxin clapped his hands. Daodong's talisman technique is just a small trick. It's useless against people like you. It's only useful against ordinary people. You can't use it too much. Close the door. I'm not receiving any guests today. Tell me in detail what's going on." Upon hearing this, Lao Dao hurriedly went to close the temple door. He thought it was about his old friend, but he didn't expect that Li Yunxin would be so concerned about it. He thought that this master from an unknown place just wanted to stay in his small temple to experience the joys and sorrows of life and avoid some troubles. He didn't like to get involved in worldly affairs. But he didn't expect that he would actually want to help. Therefore, his heart was soon filled with gratitude and he felt at ease. However, when night came, the peace in Lu Laodao's heart disappeared without a trace. Chapter 41. As soon as the sky turned dark, Li Yunxin went out. He said he was going to the Qiao family to find out what was going on. Just as old Master Lu was about to tell him that there was no one in the Qiao family, he saw him standing on the bluestone slabs on the side street. Seeing that there was no one around, he tiptoed and jumped over the 10-feet-high wall. Lu Laodao realized that this master was not only skilled, but also skilled in martial arts. He thought that he was getting old. Why didn't he think of eavesdropping? After half an hour, Li Yunxin came back. It was hard to infer his emotions from his face. So Lu Laodao asked nervously, "Brother XN, what should we do about this?" Li Yunxin poured himself a cup of tea and said, "From a legal point of view, your friend was not wronged. He killed someone and wanted to kill the mistress." Lu Laodao's eyes widened, his white beard trembled slightly. What should I say? He's an old cripple. His name is Meng Ao and he used to have a nickname called Killer Ghost. Do you know this? Oh, you don't know. But it doesn't matter. But from a moral point of view it's still quite wrong. It's because the Qiao family committed adultery, murdered their husband and plotted for the family property. Li Yunxin curled his lips. Psycho, he even wants this place. He wants this courtyard. Lu Laodao again. Obviously he couldn't accept such a thing at once. A month ago the Qiao family was still prosperous and Xiao Duanhong was still polite. But now even he was targeted. Then this old Meng is righteous. Yes. Li Yunxin put down the teacup and stood up. "I'll go to the magistrate's place. Tell me how to get there." Brother Xian wants to. Sai, you can't reason with them. You said that the magistrate is also greedy. This. I'm not going to reason. I'm going to take a look. If there's a way I'll use it. There was no other way. Yep, there was still a way. He returned 2 hours later. "I also want to eat spiced beef tonight. I heard from Madame Qiao that a few more cows came to Munanju and some of them died. This was strange. How many have died in this period of time? Give me some other dishes but don't ask for organs. No ginger." It was Li Yunxin's first long trip since he came to the city of Wei for more than 10 days. In the past, when he was living in the mountain village, he had not seen much of the world. Now that he was in the city, he greedily paid attention to every detail. Because he knew that this world was not the ordinary one he knew. It was not referring to the Taoist techniques of immortals. Instead, it was possible that a long time ago, there was once a person with enough influence to try to change this world. Perhaps he would fail, but it would definitely leave an unerasable mark. He wanted to find this imprint. Along the way he really saw scenes like those in movies and TV dramas, men and women strolling outside, and there was a night market. The fragrance from the snack stalls in the night market even made him hungry. It was hard to imagine that there would be such a scene in such a society, instead of the streets being dominated by men and young ladies who were waiting for their wives. This world was more enlightened and open than he thought. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening when he saw the magistrate's office from afar. There were few people on the street at 8 o'clock in the evening in this world. There was a river in front of the magistrate's office. It was the Green Willow River. It was relatively wide and could accommodate 3 gaily painted pleasure boats side by side. The riverside was built with bluestone slabs and planted with green willows. At this time the willows sprouted and it was misty green like smoke clouds. There was a white stone bridge on the street leading to the magistrate's office. It was built majestically and could accommodate 2 carriages side by side. On the other side of the bridge, Li Yunxin saw from a distance that there were many people walking on the street in front of the magistrate's office at the other end of the bridge. He felt a little strange, but he didn't take it seriously. After all, he hadn't fully understood the customs of this world. Maybe they were petitioning? It was good to have more people. There were about 70 or 80 people on the street at a rough estimate. He planned to walk into the crowd and take a look at the terrain before deciding which side to sneak in from. So he crossed the bridge. He walked 3 steps down the bridge. Just as the tip of his foot was about to step on the street, he stopped. Because these people, they didn't seem to be people. When he walked a few steps down the bridge, he saw a person turn out from a small street on the west side. He was wearing a light shirt and a small hat. He looked like someone from a rich family who came out to buy something in the evening. Perhaps the owner of the house was interested and wanted to try some street food. The young servant saw Li Yunxin after he came out and glanced in his direction. Then he turned his face away, hummed a little tune and walked away briskly. Then the people on the street began to move. With extremely light and swift footsteps, they surrounded him as if they were escorting him. But they weren't escorting him. They were sniffing him, looking at him and examining him. However, the servant didn't realize that he was surrounded by a group of people. When he passed by Li Yunxin, he even smiled at him. It wasn't until he walked out of the street and out of the area of the magistrate's office that the people surrounding him walked away. At this time, there were already 5 or 6 people standing in front of Li Yunxin. People without facial features. They stretched their necks and attentively looked at him. They were faceless ghosts. Li Yunxin gasped. When they died, their bodies would be occupied and they would become faceless ghosts. There were 70 or 80 ghosts on the street in front of the magistrate's office. Maybe there were ghosts everywhere. How could there be so many of them? Not to mention the magistrate's office. Even ordinary rich families would pay attention to feng shui when they built their houses. With so many ghosts gathered on the street, ordinary people would feel something was wrong when they walked past. Maybe it was gloomy or cold. But now, all these things were gathered here. Li Yunxin realized that maybe one or a few people in the magistrate's office knew about this. There were Daotong and Kenzo schools stationed in this city. They should also know about it. This should be some kind of formation. He frowned slightly and didn't step into the street. Instead, he just walked along the willow tree by the river for a while, feeling the extremely subtle fluctuations of Reiki. Some kind of Yin spirit formation. Something involving Yin spirits might not necessarily be evil. But a magistrate's office was already rare in the secular world. Why would such a thing be set up? He originally planned to sneak in and see what the magistrate said. But at this time he dispelled the idea. If he used Reiki in such a formation, he might be discovered. Whether he was discovered by Daotong or Kenzo, it was not a good thing. After thinking for a long time, the servant who had walked past before came back. He still walked on the same street. But this time the Yin spirits didn't follow him. Chapter 42. Seeing this scene, Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat. When he passed by him, he greeted, "Oh, so fast." The servant had already seen Li Yunxin's clothes. In order to keep a low profile today, he only wore a green Taoist robe with a wooden hairpin in his hair. But his appearance saved everything. He still looked noble and out of this world, like a young master in disguise. The young manservant was obviously happy to have such a beautiful person greet him. So he stopped and looked down at the food box in his hand. He thought it would be okay to say a few words, so he smiled. "Yes. Young master, you look unfamiliar. Did you just come to the city of Wei?" "Sort of. The weather here is a bit strange." Li Yunxin tightened his collar. "I didn't feel it before crossing the bridge. But after crossing the bridge and entering this street, I felt the temperature drop." When he said this, the servant was standing in front of the faceless ghosts who were staring at him. One of them was almost as heavy as him. The servant frowned. You are right. I was just saying there was something evil about this street today. When I came out of the mansion and entered this street, I felt cold. Now, my God, isn't it the spring chill? The cold wind is blowing into my neck." "Ah, you are from the mansion." "From the magistrate's mansion?" Li Yunxin's eyes brightened and asked with interest. "Hey, I am a third-class servant." The servant smiled reservedly and then seemed to realize that this young master probably didn't know what third-class servant meant. So he explained, "It is quite comfortable. There is silver every new year. After a year of frugality, I can have 20 taels of silver. After a few years of saving, I can buy a few acres of land in my hometown, then, well." Speaking of this, he felt that this young master was probably not interested in these things, so he stopped talking. Unexpectedly, Li Yunxin stood up straight and leaned forward slightly as if he was very interested. "This is really good. Little brother, you found yourself a good master. In my hometown it is not so good." He was good-looking. When he pretended to be kind, it made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Coupled with his previous professional experience, he was a master at conversing with people. In the end, the young man slapped the back of his head. The snacks in the food box had all gone cold. He quickly excused himself to Li Yunxin and trotted into the alley. Li Yunxin took another look at the house in the darkness and walked back with his hands behind his back. With the Yin spirit formation, he didn't want to attract anyone's attention. Thus, he could only obtain information through a few words. After a round of questioning, coupled with his own deductions and analysis, he had a rough idea of what was going on. His initial conjecture was correct. The Qiao family and Governor Li wanted Lao Dao's courtyard. Whether it was the Qiao family or the governor, they had no prejudice against Lu Laodao and himself. They just wanted money. Li Yunxin had long understood the thoughts of the three Qiao family members. Lao Dao's real estate was indeed a huge fortune for them. Besides, the old man had no children. He was just a strange young man, so he didn't take him seriously. As for Governor Li, at first he didn't understand why such an official would give up so many ways to make money, but had to take the risk of arousing public resentment and tarnishing his own reputation to conspire for a real estate under his rule. At this time he roughly figured it out. Governor Li seemed to have offended someone. A very powerful person, a person who could threaten his life. Prefectural Magistrate Li spent all his wealth and begged the masters of Taoism and sword sect in the city of Wei to make such a nether spirit formation to protect his house. The manservant named Zhe also felt that the street was chilly tonight. It could be seen that this big formation was indeed newly built. Governor Li was short of money, and he was not an upright official. The Qiao family gave her a good thing and bullied a destitute old Taoist. Li Yunxin felt that she would probably do this if she was in the position of Prefectural Magistrate Li. Thinking of this, he let out a sigh of relief. Originally, he was so concerned because he was afraid that there were other secrets. For example, he was targeted by someone. Now it seemed that he was just unlucky to be involved in it. Well, it couldn't be said like this. Maybe it was someone else who was unlucky. He walked all the way back to the temple and his thoughts were almost sorted out. He pushed the door closed and went into the backyard. When he entered the main room, he found that the table was already filled with food. Thin slices of beef with soy sauce were placed in the center. The meat was almost transparent, and the sauce on the meat was soft and fragrant. Around it was a plate of crispy peanuts, which were yellow and plump, a plate of stir-fried pork with hibiscus, with jade-colored hibiscus slices and red and green peppers, a plate of spicy chicken with bamboo shoots. The chicken was cooked in the pot and then it was scooped up when it was tender. It was served with bamboo shoots picked in the spring morning, which was fragrant and sweet. Next to the 4 dishes, there was a small silver wine pot. Li Yunxin was happy at first sight. Wasn't this the one that Lu Laodao treasured the most? Usually he was afraid of knocking it out when he took it out. This Laodao really doted on his old friend. Li Yunxin sat at the table and picked up a few peanuts with his chopsticks. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. Then he picked up a piece of bamboo shoots to eat. When his mouth had a little taste, he went to eat the beef with soy sauce. After a few mouthfuls, he poured a glass of wine and sent it into his mouth. The wine was not strong, and it was long and refreshing when it entered his throat. When it reached his stomach, it was warm and harmonious. It really dispelled the tiredness of the day. He drank another glass of wine before he saw Lu Laodao coming in from outside the door. He observed his expression, wanting to say something but hesitating. Li Yunxin found it funny. Lu Laodao was an old man, but in front of a kid, like him, he behaved like a kid. He raised his chin and asked, "Have you eaten?" Laodao sat next to the table and stared at him. He asked eagerly, "Brother X, and how is it?" Li Yunxin told him about this matter in detail. But Laodao was obviously more concerned about something else. "My old friend? If Governor Li is determined to do this, no one can save him." Li Yunxin put down his chopsticks and looked at Laodao seriously. "No one can persuade him. Because this matter will be related to his family's life. What else is more important than this? So, if you want to save your old friend, you have to take drastic measures. Solve the problem of Governor Li." Laodao thought for a while and blinked his eyes. "Brother X and means to help him get through this disaster? Protect him? How can we do that? Even a governor can't do anything. Li Yunxin looked at him strangely. "Your idea is so strange. Why do you want to help him?" He picked up a peanut and threw it into his mouth, then smiled. "He wants to kill me and I want to help him. I am so despicable. That Governor Li, won't it be over if we kill him?" Chapter 43. As soon as he said this, Laodao tried to cover his mouth. But he didn't make a fool of himself. He just bowed and sat down again. But he still lowered his voice. Brother X, and alas. How can you say that? The prefectural magistrate is such a big figure. He's the father and mother in the city of Wei. Even in the imperial court of the Daqing state, how many officials are there? Brother Xin, don't mention this again. If anything happens to prefectural magistrate, Brother Xin, you also don't want to. I don't want to be noticed. Li Yunxin poured a glass of wine for Lao Dao and shook his head with a smile. But I won't be happy if this thing goes on. The best result is that we move out of this house and find another place to live. Then my mind won't be clear. I don't bully people, but I don't want to be bullied. I'm standing here, but you came and kicked me. What's the meaning of this? The worst result is that the house will be confiscated and we'll have to eat in jail. At that time, it's hard for me not to expose my identity. I only slept on a straw bed in Qinghe for a few days. Let me tell you, I choose my bed well and I'm angry when I get up. Once I don't sleep well, I want to mess with people. So, you see, we can only kill him. He's just a prefectural magistrate of the Daqing state. What's so great about him? Who would think that I, a little Taoist boy, could kill him? Or you, an old man, could do it? There's a big nether formation set by the masters of Daotong and Kenzo outside his house. He has enemies and they're very powerful. Once he's dead, people will think it's done by his enemies and it's none of my business. At that time we'll deal with the Qiao family and they won't make trouble anymore. Who will remember the Hongfu escort agency? If your old friend is still lucky, he can also get out of trouble. What are you waiting for? Drink the wine and think about it. Am I talking about Li Jufu? Lao Dao didn't know who Li Jufu was. But after thinking about it, although he felt that Li Yunxin's analysis was reasonable, he still felt that something was wrong. After drinking the wine, he smacked his lips and realized the problem. But Brother Xin, how did you, kill him? Lao Dao still didn't say those treasonous words out loud. Brother Xin also said that he has the protection of the array. You didn't dare to use any tricks tonight because you were afraid of being discovered. If he used ordinary methods, there would always be traces to follow. The coroner won't just sit around and do nothing. When the time comes, he'll find out that we're the culprits. Besides, there are also people from the Daotong Kenzo. I'm not sure what divine abilities they have. Li Yunxin drained the remaining wine in the pot, drank it in one gulp and stood up. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Lu Laodao felt that his face was glowing with a strange light. Even, it could be considered as demonic. I don't know what divine abilities those people have. Li Yunxin seemed to have thought of something and seemed to be on the verge of laughing. His eyes seemed to be filled with some kind of emotion full of malice, pleasure, but mixed with the impulse to destroy. But they also don't know what divine abilities I have. Let me tell you. My divine ability is called heart-piercing. Lu Laodao didn't really understand what he was talking about. But he understood one thing. He used to think that he had more or less understood this young master's temperament and hobbies. But now he knew, perhaps what he knew was not even the slightest bit. This young man was not as gentle and easygoing as he looked. Perhaps in his bones, Lu Laodao trembled slightly and forced himself not to look at Li Yunxin at this time. Perhaps there was some kind of terrifying demon hidden in his bones. When the sound of the clapper reached his ears, the night wind blew. Li Yunxin put down his pen and looked at a piece of paper on the table by the moonlight. On it was some information he had sorted out about Governor Li. Lu Laodao didn't know how he could kill Governor Li under the protection of the masters of Daotong and Kenzo without leaving a trace. But to him, this matter had opened up some dusty memories of his previous life. Killing people, killing people. Li Yunxin laughed in the dark. He used to like to do this the most. His servant Azay knew that Governor Li was 46 this year. He was slightly fat, suspected to have high blood pressure and fatty liver. He had been an official for generations, and his ancestors were second-rank officials. But counting the 4 generations from his father, almost all of them didn't have a good ending. 3 ancestors died of shock, and his father lived for a long time and died of palpitations and asthma. Heart disease. It was probably a family inheritance. Azay said that Governor Li had the style of his father in both appearance and behavior. Then it could be ruled out, the possibility that his surname was Wang. Recently he suddenly didn't like to eat fish. To eat chicken he had to skin it. A few days ago the Sanhika Dragon King Temple needed to be repaired. He first reprimanded the people and then allocated the money. The amount was a little more than the request. There was one more thing. 5 or 6 days ago there was a rainstorm. That night lightning flashed and thunder roared. The main hall of the government office collapsed. Then, according to Azay, the adults don't like to eat the snacks on weekdays. Today their appetite is a little better, so they asked me to buy some sour soup. Li Yunxin stared at the paper for a while, got up and took the sword Bai Yunxin gave him from the west wall. The sword body glowed softly in the moonlight, and he held it and waved it a few times. I hate this feeling the most, he whispered. In the next 2 or 3 days, fewer people came to the temple. Li Yunxin walked back and forth in the front yard as usual, but he wasn't just concentrating on attacking his seal. First, the pain brought to him by such a small amount of wish power wasn't enough for him to concentrate on dealing with it. Second, he was trying to find out some things. But people seemed to start to stay away from him and Lu Laodao. He had good ears and eyes. Occasionally, when passers-by saw them and avoided them with a strange look, he heard, "Bandits. It is said that they are going to arrest him soon." This kind of thing really surprised him. In his impression, the government in this feudal society should be extremely vicious. If they said to arrest someone, they would tie him up with chains and send him to prison. But he actually heard in the gossip of passers-by that the old servant hasn't confessed yet, the evidence isn't conclusive. He was dumbfounded at that time. The evidence isn't conclusive? In this kind of era, the evidence is conclusive? But when he thought about what happened in Qinghe County, it seemed a little strange. In such a remote county far away from the emperor, Constable Xing, as the local tyrant, actually made a big fuss and tricked him into escaping from prison. That's why he wanted to kill him. He was also paying attention to something. The evidence is conclusive, right? Chapter 44. If these things made Li Yunxin feel inconceivable, then a word from Qiao Jiaming's mouth that afternoon really surprised him. Lu Laodao was very depressed these days. He probably felt that he had to leave a way out for Li Yunxin, so he ran around with a thick face. But when it came to this kind of thing, the prefectural magistrate personally intervened. Those few friends, who were just acquaintances, were afraid to avoid it, and no one paid attention to him. Laodao was like a fish on the chopping board. He knew that the knife was going to fall, but he couldn't do anything. In the afternoon, when Qiao Jiaming strolled to the door of the temple with cruel and proud magic, Laodao already had a mouth full of blisters. He asked Li Yunxin indirectly how the method was going. Li Yunxin just smiled and sorted out the clues he got today in his mind. At this time he heard a strange laugh. "Oh, I say, you two are still free?" Qiao Jiaming poked his head into the temple door and looked left and right. Seeing that there were no pilgrims at this time, he leaned on the door frame with satisfaction. "If I were you, I wouldn't be so generous. I would have surrendered long ago. Maybe the prefectural magistrate would be soft-hearted and sentence me to exile instead of beheading, then I could live a few more days." Li Yunxin put his hands in his sleeves, walked to him and stood still. He nodded slightly. "Thank you for your concern. Are you here to offer incense? For money or to get rid of disasters?" Qiao Jiaming tilted his head and looked at him, feeling very unhappy. This kid didn't have any fear at all. He changed his face and approached Li Yunxin, saying fiercely, "Don't be silly, kid. Do you think you still have a way to live? Let me tell you, it's me who used money. I want you to die. You and that old thing, neither of you can live." Li Yunxin tilted her face slightly to avoid his saliva. Without the slightest sincerity she said, "Oh, that's right. I'm so scared. But look at you, you're so easily agitated. How did you manage to survive until now? I heard that in the past few years, you swindled people on the streets and caused a lot of illnesses. Why didn't anyone find you to settle the score?" Qiao Jiaming's face darkened and he wanted to curse out loud. But on second thought he was going to die in a few days anyway, so he suppressed his anger and smiled. "Hey, you're worried about me? Back then, Grandpa." Unfortunately, he was still no match for Li Yunxin when it came to arguing. After talking back and forth for nearly half an hour, Qiao Jiaming finally couldn't hold back and wanted to make a move. But when he thought of Li Yunxin's methods last time, he didn't dare to make a move. At this time he regretted coming here. He had a belly full of evil fire, but he couldn't vent it. He had no choice but to spit a few times at the entrance of the temple. He spat until his mouth was dry and his tongue was dry. Only then did he bitterly say to himself, "Just you wait, spit. You're such a high-ranking official, humph. Why do you have to talk about procedural justice? Bah, what the hell is that?" After he left, Lu Laodao looked at Li Yunxin dumbfoundedly. "Brother X and you." It was the first time to see Li Yunxin like this, quarreling with a hooligan. He was really like a young man who didn't have any schemes and was annoyed. But Li Yunxin had calmed down again. He closed his eyes and thought for a while, then smiled at him. Somehow Lu Laodao suddenly felt that from his smile, he saw some cruel meaning. He really didn't know if it was his illusion. In fact, Li Yunxin was reading a word in his mind: procedural justice. How could this word appear in this world? That senior was more interesting than he originally thought. How much did he change the world? Governor Li wanted to make the case an ironclad case of procedural justice. But he probably had a guilty conscience. After releasing the news, he didn't make it public. Li Yunxin even thought that this news was released by the idiot Xiao Jiaming, just to see him and Lu Laodao in a panic these days. Unfortunately, he was disappointed. And in Xiao Jiaming's view, Li Yunxin finally couldn't sit still after holding on for a few rounds that afternoon. That Li Yunxin and Lu Laodao also began to walk the streets and alleys, asking everywhere. Xiao Jiaming asked and learned that the fool was asking about his past. He used to. Well, there were some things that were not right. However, when it came to treating illnesses, it couldn't be said that it could only cure the patient and not kill the patient, right? In any case, he had read some medical books and learned a little bit about it. Treating those poor people who looked down on proper doctors. Well, they might have used the wrong medicine or charged the wrong amount of money. Who hasn't made a mistake at one time or another? Anyway, if you got sick and couldn't see a doctor, you would die. No one had ever heard of a doctor from a medical center who didn't die, right? Did that guy want to use this as an excuse? Bah. Governor Li was determined to get that house so he wouldn't care about him. And he also heard that this guy went to find someone from Governor Li's mansion. He was a bit smart and knew how to ask for help. But who would care about the few silver coins in his and Lu Laodao's hands? Xiao Jiaming was more and more happy. He even hoped that the day when Li Yunxin and Lu Laodao came to the magistrate's office would be delayed. It would be interesting to see them like headless flies now. Originally they said that they might have met a noble like Yu Meng. But now it seemed that young Master Yu was just interested in them. He had long forgotten them. Just like this, another 3 days passed. That afternoon, in the spacious backyard of the magistrate's office, Governor Li was drinking tea. Governor Li's real name was Li Yaoxi. He was a kind and compassionate person with a broad heart. Li Yaoxi had been an official for more than 20 years, and he always had a reputation of being impartial and strict in the officialdom. The cases that went through his hands were all impeccable, the evidence was conclusive and the process was reasonable. Even if the Iron Judge of Jinghua came, he wouldn't be able to find any fault. In fact, according to his compassionate character, the old servant was already old, and he confessed, so he should quickly close the case and give him a quick death, so that he wouldn't have to suffer. Who knew that the old servant was a hard nut to crack? Both of his legs had been crippled, but he still didn't want to let go. Ordinarily, it would have been better to free him earlier and make up a statement. But the Iron Judge was going to patrol the city of Wei soon, so he had to be more careful. Thinking of this, he felt annoyed. In fact, he shouldn't be so annoyed. His chest was beating rapidly and he was flustered. Everything he saw made him feel annoyed and anxious, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. His usually quick-witted servant, Zhe, was not pleasing to his eyes these days. Speaking of filial piety, he did have it. But these days he always did bad things. A few days ago, he said that he found a piece of wood left from the last lightning strike in the yard. He said it was lightning-struck wood, which could ward off evil spirits, and presented it like a treasure. But when he thought of what happened that night, he felt his heart beating rapidly, so he scolded him immediately. In the afternoon he said that he saw the master was annoyed, so he told me some anecdotes, and told him about the Dragon King temple at the mouth of the Sanjiankou, and was scolded again. Later he became timid and aggrieved and stopped talking. But his expression, appearance and walking posture. He reprimanded him again. Something was wrong. Something was wrong, but he just couldn't tell. Li Yaoxi put the teacup in his hand heavily on the table, and felt that it was time to end this case. Maybe because of this case, he always felt uncomfortable. Chapter 45. Magistrate Li made a decision. Being reprimanded by him, Zhe felt bad. Once he felt bad, he thought of that young master. In the past few days he became good friends with that young master. That young master Li should be a rich and idle person, and a very gentle and kind one at that. After meeting him that night, he met him again the next day. He thought that the young master would be proud of his identity and not talk to a servant like him. Unexpectedly, the young master greeted him warmly, which made him feel touched for a long time. But talking to this young master Li made him feel really comfortable. It was obviously just a casual chat, just polite words, but when it came from his mouth, it seemed to have a rhythmic charm, It made him feel as if his heart was soaked in warm water. For so many years he had never had this kind of experience. So he opened his heart and told him all his troubles. He told him about his troubles and the trivial things of daily life. What the young master ate, what he drank, what he used today, he told him everything. Forget it, he was embarrassed, saying that he was not talking about these things, that he was not interested. But that young master only smiled warmly and shook his head, saying that between friends, it was not about these trivial things. Between friends? Young Master Li regarded him as a friend. With such feelings, Aze went out of the small door from the backyard, turned into a small alley, and saw that young Master Li standing under a willow tree. He held a folding fan in his hand, gently patting it in his palm. The fan and palm made a sound as if knocking on Aze's heart. As he listened, his footsteps unconsciously synchronized with the knocking sound. He didn't even realize it. Recently he had to see each other every day right here, under this willow tree, the two of them. Sometimes, there would occasionally be a flash of thought passing through his mind, I feel like I'm possessed. But such a thought was quickly ignored. He would still come to see this young Master Li. How is your young master's condition today? Young Master Li asked him. Still, irritated. Aze said, recently the young master is irritated when he sees me. There was some grievance in his words. After feeling wronged for a while, he raised his head. Young master, do you have anything to teach me? Young Master Li Yunshin smiled. He lowered his voice slightly. When you go back today, tell your lord when he's having his meal. Tell him, are you satisfied with the taste? Sometimes, Aze felt that some of young Master Li's words were a bit strange. However, he just couldn't tell what was strange about it. What was even stranger was that he had only said it once and he had already learned it. When he learned to speak to adults, he could not help saying the same thing. But she always thought, young Master Li was such a beautiful man. She sounded like him, so it must be a good thing. At this time, young Master Li tapped his palm with his folding fan and said in a low voice, go. Aze turned around as if he was sleepwalking. Satisfied, he walked back with strange steps. Seeing him disappear around the corner, Li Yunshin took a few steps back, leaned against the willow tree and let out a heavy sigh. Very tired. But it was very exciting. Trying to do this for the first time, to hint and guide a person and then through him, to do what he should have done himself, was like controlling a puppet's arm through some kind of remote control, and through the puppet's arm he manipulated another person to complete a meticulously crafted painting. He wanted to try this kind of thing in his previous life, but he never had such a good opportunity. This time, it was the servant who delivered himself to him. And the people of this era, the mental defense was really like a blank piece of paper. They had never experienced such a rich and complicated information bombardment. Even if he was an evil person, from the perspective of the field he was proficient in, his mind was as pure as a blank piece of paper. And after these days of thinking, Li Yunshin finally knew what the governor was guarding against. It was said that the magistrate had been struck by lightning on a thunderstorm night. Most of the main hall collapsed, and two beautiful concubines of the governor died. But the strange thing about this matter was, even if someone was in the main hall, it should be Lord Li. What were the two concubines doing in the main hall at night? When he asked Aze, he knew what was strange. It was said that that night in the main hall he heard a voice. It seemed to be a young man laughing. He also said that the rain had stopped and he went to the main hall to see. There was blood. There were embers in the half that had not collapsed. It seemed that someone had made a fire. After that night, Lord Li went to the residences of the Shangqing Danding sect and the Lingshu sword sect in the city of Wei. The masters there had never cared about worldly affairs. But Lord Li persuaded them. Not only did he persuade them, but he also sent someone to have a look and perform a spell. Lord Li, on the other hand, was alive. Everything could be explained now. That person. Then that Governor Li was almost exposed in front of him. In the most recent 5 days it had been a long time. Li Yunshin breathed a sigh of relief and turned to look at the scenery in the distance. The weather was good today, but the willow catkins began to float. His nose was a little itchy. So he waved the folding fan in front of him, with one hand behind his back and the other gently fanning, and walked along the road. There was a tailor's shop on this road. Lu Laodao was naturally not familiar with these things, and Li Yunshin didn't know much about the materials. It was Miss Yin who picked his eyes. That girl was stubborn. When everyone looked at the two people living in the temple with strange eyes, she ran into the door and asked Li Yunshin with a straight face if he had an affair with Miss Qiao. Li Yunshin didn't have the mood to care about her little girl's worries. He just said a few words and left impatiently. who knew that Miss Ian would feel that she was the one who had hurt Brother Xian's heart with her question. So she became their firm supporter. This was also a good thing. So he left this matter to her to handle. Li Yunxin walked to the door of the shop, and Miss Ian was already waiting there. He didn't know if all the girls in the city of Wei were so bold. After these days, Miss Ian was not stingy to express her love for Li Yunxin. Now when she saw Li Yunxin waving the folding fan and walking in the spring breeze, she felt that her heart was about to melt. These past few days her heart had been pounding especially hard. Miss Yin's family was considered well off so she could read. Since she could read, she liked to read like a man. She didn't read classics and history but only read legends. The love stories of the chivalrous men and young ladies in the legends had long taken root in her heart. Now that she was sure that Brother Xian was wronged and involved in a lawsuit for no reason, and her uncle didn't care, she felt that she had really become the heroine of a legend. When she looked at her Brother Xian again, she only felt that the day of separation was getting closer. Maybe it would be like what the legend said, after many years, both of them would have gray hair at the temples before they could hold hands and look into each other's eyes. She felt even sadder. She thought that Brother Xian probably thought the same. That's why he asked her to find a shop to make a greenish-gray inner shirt for him. Not only greenish-gray but also fish scale patterns. She went to so many shops but only found it in this one. Now she was holding the shirt, watching Li Yunxin walking over. Somehow, she felt a little sour in her nose and her eyes turned red. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.